Can we talk about Tales of Arise? Because I love this game. It's the most recent Mothership title in the Tales series, having come out in 2021. It's the first game I've played blind on this channel. It's the fifth in the Tales series that I've played at all, and I fell in love with it almost immediately, and it has kind of taken over my life since then. I have many thoughts on it, and today I'd like to share just a few of them. So I'm going to try to keep this review non-spoilery at the beginning, and then we'll get into spoilers a little bit later on once we get into the more plot and character related aspects of the game. I'll give a little warning before we do go into spoiler territory, but to begin with, we'll start with the surface level details and then we'll dive in later on to the more analytical aspects, I suppose. So on a surface level, the design and visuals are just beautiful. The art style is a little bit different from the previous Tales games, which I do quite enjoy actually. It has a very painterly style, but it also, the graphics are obviously very improved. The characters, like proportions and everything, feel a little more developed as they have been over the course of the series. It's adapting the old styles and evolving into something new, which is going to be a running theme throughout this review because the entire basis for Tales of Arise is the idea of inheritance and evolution. I've spoken about this a little bit before. It's not just in the plot and the characters, but also in the game itself as a concept. It's taking things from the old games and adapting it to suit a newer, modern approach to video games and storytelling, which I think is definitely reflected in the art style and everything for the game. What I find really interesting with the art style though is that the game itself, the characters, the world, it's all very beautiful and painterly and colourful. The menus and UI are very simplistic, quite monochromatic, a lot of black and white, simple menus. It's also a little bit clinical, but it does create this kind of contrast between the menus and the world outside of those menus that almost seems to reflect the contrast between fantasy and sci-fi in the game, which I find highly interesting. Just a little detail that I've noticed anyway. Maybe it's a stretch, I don't know. The graphics are of course gorgeous. I played it on the PS4, so I probably wasn't playing it with the best graphics, to be honest, but I think it ran fairly okay. The draw distance was okay, things didn't take ages loading in. The expressions on the characters were all really vivid and beautiful. The frame rate was a little bit janky at times, but only during the battles, especially during the boost strikes and mystic arts. When there was a lot of action going on during cutscenes and things, it was totally fine. There were a few errors in the subtitles, which I did notice, which was a little odd, but I think they were probably using a lot of dictation software to try to put the subtitles into words rather than having someone just type everything out, because that would have taken far too long. And to be honest, the development of the game was fairly rushed towards the end, which does make a lot of sense. They were working on it since Tales of Berseria came out. It was originally slated to come out in 2020. They had to push it back to 2021 because it was just so much more ambitious than anything that they expected it to be. This is something that they've said in the producers and the directors have said in interviews before. So I can understand why there might be a few issues with the subtitles. I think it is more on the Western end with the English subtitles. I've not heard anything about errors with the Japanese subtitles, but also I can't read that much Japanese, so here we are. But generally speaking, the graphics were very pretty. And my PS4 handled it fairly well. It did at times sound like it was about to take flight, but I don't know whether that's just my PS4 being old. The character designs, I will only speak about generally for now. I'm going to talk about more specific details later on, but I do love all of the designs. I think that they're all really interesting and unique. You can really tell which character is which. Even the side characters, when they have aspects that tie in with the NPCs that are just walking around whichever town that they're from, you can still tell which NPC is which in terms of the side characters, the important ones, as opposed to just the background ones. Even just by looking at them, they're unique enough that they're recognizable, which is nice. And it does tie it into the NPCs to make it feel like the world is more cohesive as well. They don't feel like they're out of place, which is a really welcome design aspect. I also love all of the area designs. They're so detailed. I have an art book that came with my hootle edition of the game, and I have a bigger art book, which is the World Guidance for Tales of Arise that came with a 25th anniversary set of books that I purchased because I cannot control myself and I love this series. It is filled with the most beautiful concept art with so much detail down to them having plans for starships and every single Zoogle design, every single weapon design. There are so many details and the concept art is so pretty. They really spent so much time on the designs for each area and you really get a vibe for how each place feels just by looking at it. There is such a contrast between them. I think it really helped with the plot of the game and how elements in particular are in effect in each realm of Dana specifically. It really helped to create a contrast between each area. The dungeons were also really unique. I'm really thankful actually for how much unique detail they've put into the dungeons, considering that the past couple of games, a lot of the dungeons have felt quite repetitive. Some of the designs were quite similar, so it's nice to have fresh new designs for each of the dungeons as well. I suppose the biggest aspect though for the design and visuals is the fact that they leaned heavily upon 3D in this game as opposed to 2D. So where in the previous games they use a lot of 2D anime assets, especially for like character portraits and in skits, they've relied a lot more on 3D in this game. In interviews they've said that this is to do with immersion and keeping the player involved in the world as they go between playing the game themselves and seeing cutscenes and skits, and also to modernise the game to suit the new era that we're going into for video games. And I think that they did really well with that. I actually really enjoyed the unity between the assets. It felt very cohesive, which was nice. Not that they've been necessarily bad at doing the 2D assets before. Like, usually they're very good at translating between the 3D models and the 2D portraits, but the 3D looks so good in this game. Even to the point where I see 2D sprites of the characters used for the mobile games now, and I think that they look a little odd, which is very strange, but I'm so used to them in 3D. But I think the more important aspect of that is that it gives them more opportunity for expressions and actions in skits. I actually really love how they've changed the skits in this game to have a kind of comic book style, and also to have the characters move around more and do things more, because they're not limited to just a few assets of sprite expressions or little faces trapped in boxes that can only move around a little bit. They can actually have the characters do things. They can have smoke come in, they can have items show up, they have so much more possibility when it comes to the 3D skits as opposed to the 2D. I do still love the 2D in my heart. I think that they're beautiful for what they are. I think that they still stand up even now. But the most important aspect about the skits is always the dialogue, and I feel like they really captured the dialogue even while changing the way that the skits are presented. They're still about the dialogue between the characters, and it just allows for them to enhance that dialogue even more by giving the characters more expression and action. It's really good. But the other major thing I wanted to talk about in relation to 3D and 2D is the anime cutscenes in the game. So the openings were both gorgeous, they're beautiful. They did an extra trailer as well last year, which was also beautifully animated. The actual anime cutscenes within the game's plot, however, were a little bit janky at times. Not to be rude about it or anything, like, they were still nice, but I feel like maybe the animation team was a little bit rushed with them, which is a real shame, because it meant that I ended up actually liking the 3D cutscenes more than the anime cutscenes, which is odd because usually the anime cutscenes are very hype and exciting because it's like, oh, this is an important moment in the game and this is how they're presenting it, it's really cool. I like that they still had them. I wish they'd been given more budget though and more time. That would have been nice. But yeah, overall, the design and visuals of the game I highly enjoyed. I think that they looked really good. It was a very captivating game. As for the gameplay itself, what can I say? I enjoyed it a lot. The tutorials were not intrusive, they were very easy to understand, they didn't last too long or get in your face too much. I don't really have much else to say on tutorials, I think they were fine. I think the systems in the game itself were also easy to understand, they did their job as intended. I really liked the title system for getting more skills for the characters, but also the fact that they give you a little bit more insight into the characters with the descriptions, the little icons, and what type of skills that they even get. I thought that was really neat. I like the weapon forging system and the accessory forging system. To be honest, I used the weapon forging more than the accessories as I played it the first time, but still not that much because gold is hard to come by, but I enjoyed finding the weapons and things. It was fairly easy to get items to drop to forge weapons, and late in the game you get tons of ore materials to make accessories, so that was easy as well. I did actually quite enjoy the skill transferal system for the accessories. I think that worked really well as well. I still feel like I haven't used it to its utmost potential, but it was okay. It was good. As for the combat itself, I'm going to give more details on each character later on, but the general gist of it is that I really enjoyed it. I feel like it got even more fun the more I learned how to use it and the more freedom I was given with the system. At the beginning it felt quite restrictive, only having 6 arts, 3 on the ground and 3 in the air, but later on as those restrictions are lifted off and giving more arts and everything, it just felt so much fun to try and find new combos and new ways of using the characters to their utmost potential with their special abilities and boost strikes and everything. I think I enjoyed fighting more in my first playthrough of the game. I've played it twice. My second one I did do on a New Game Plus, so everything was far too easy. I put it up to the highest difficulty and it was still far too easy, but that's because I was over leveled. I still haven't technically finished my second playthrough. I'm literally at the last boss, but so far it's been fairly easy. So perhaps I need to balance it a little bit more for my third playthrough, if I ever do. I will do one at some point, surely. Tied into the combat actually is the training grounds. They were fantastic for getting to grips with each character's fighting style and really encouraging the player to think more creatively about how they use each character in combat. To be honest, it's through the training grounds that I really started to enjoy the more complex aspects of the combat, because before that I was just kind of using the characters for their most basic purpose. But as I went on and did all of the training grounds, I really found myself thinking about the arts themselves and what specifically they do in moving the character to certain places, or throwing the enemy in the air, or throwing it to the ground, and how to kind of chain those together in a way that feels smooth. It was really interesting. I do kind of wish there was a mode where you could fight against your other party members. That just would have been fun, but I suppose that'll never happen, but you never know. You know what else was fun though? Fishing. It was simple, but it was fun. I really enjoyed the fishing minigame. I caught every fish in the game. I thought that there was a lot of incentive to do it, especially in the beginning, because the fish that you catch they're either used as food items or they are commodity items for selling. And because gold is so hard to come by, fishing is a good way of doing that, because you don't have to buy bait or anything. You just get a lure and then you can fish. So it's easy to sell the fish that you catch, which is nice. And if you catch a boss fish, then you get a skit. So there was even more incentive to catch the harder fish, because then you get more skits, which give you more character development and more humor. And it's just I really enjoyed it. The minigame itself was fairly simple. As soon as I figured out the animations were tied to the directions that you have to move the joystick, and it kind of became too easy in a sense, because it never got more complex over time. So it was always just the same controls. I kind of would have liked different prompts or something else to make it a little bit more difficult as it went on, but still I did enjoy what we got with the fishing. And to be honest, I'm pretty sure most people are fine with it as it is, because not everyone is a fishing maniac. The one thing I do wish there were more of though was kind of minigames, to be honest. I know that the fishing was the main minigame, but I feel like they could have had other ones, especially with them camping so much. They could have had like a card game or something between the characters at camp. That would have just made sense. But I can see why they didn't do that as well. Like, they didn't have much time in development or anything, so they're not going to have time to make a bunch of minigames either. And to be honest, I don't think they've done minigames as much in recent Tales games. They had character cards in Tales of Berseria. They had a few minigames actually in Tales of Berseria, but they didn't really have any in Tales of Zestiria. I don't know, I would have liked 1 or 2 more in Tales of Arise, but I enjoyed what we got with them. Now, the voice acting. I think it was phenomenal in both English and in Japanese. The first playthrough I did obviously was on the channel here, I did it in English, and then the second playthrough that I did myself, I played in Japanese, and I just adored both casts. I thought that they were phenomenal in depicting the characters. There were a couple of differences that were quite interesting, like in Japanese, Dohalim has a much lower voice than he does in English, and Kisara has a little bit of a higher voice. which I found quite jarring at first, but now I'm kind of used to it, I think. But generally speaking, I've really enjoyed both of the casts. I think that they did such a great job of characterizing each of the characters and of bringing them to life. Their really emotional moments were all so good in both dubs. I really enjoyed it. Notable moments, there were a few lines from Alphen specifically that really hit me. In English at the very least, with Ray Chase, just he's phenomenal. Obviously Shionne, played by Erica Lindbeck in the English dub, just broke me at several points because she's a phenomenal voice actor. I think that they all did such a good job. Obviously though, the highlight of both dubs was Hootle, of course, because why wouldn't it be Hootle? Megan Taylor Harvey did such a good job in the English dub for Hootle. She actually sounded like a bird. Whereas in the Japanese dub, he kind of sounds more like a cartoon bird rather than like an actual bird. But he sounded a lot more realistic in English, which I found quite funny. But no, I enjoyed both dubs a lot. I thought that it was nice to have an experience of both of them and to hear the differences. I'll probably point out a few differences as we go along and talk about the different characters. But generally speaking, I really enjoyed the voice acting. As for the plot itself, in general, it was unputdownable. As I mentioned before, it kind of focuses on the ideas of inheritance and evolution, but it's also driven by themes of love and compassion and rising up against oppression. I think that they did a phenomenal job of looking into all of these themes with an intelligent discussion rather than just dividing it into black and white and making the villains feel super villainous and the heroes feel utterly heroic. I think that they did a really great job of showing the grey there. So generally speaking, I would say play the game. I don't really want to go too far into giving a plot overview non-spoilery because I feel like the game is best enjoyed not knowing too much about it because it's filled with twists and turns, and I had a ball playing it. I could not put it down. I kept thinking about it whenever I wasn't playing it, so I would recommend just stop the video now, go play it if you've not already. It's really good. Or watch a let's play. I've got one. Many other people have some. Go watch them. But if you don't care about spoilers, or if you know everything about it, Tales of Arise already, let's get into the nitty-gritty spoilery stuff, okay? Because that's what we're here for. So to speak again generally about the plot, I really enjoyed it. Again, love and sacrifice and all the other themes of the game, hatred and what comes after everything, after slavery, after liberation. Oh, I just think that they did such a good job with the plot. I genuinely keep thinking about it and finding new things about the plot that really intrigue me. To be honest, I made some notes as I was playing that I didn't share during my Let's Play, partially because at the time I thought that they were either too conspiratorial or potentially spoilery, and I didn't want to spoil the game without knowing. To be honest, I wish I'd given more of my thoughts as I was playing the game, rather than just writing them down, but I did write them down while I was not recording. I wrote them while I was out of the house, so who knows, but I wish I had given them as I was playing. I think that would have been interesting, but I'll keep that in mind for later. Hindsight is 2020, as they say. But a few of the things that I thought about as I was playing the game that are just kind of general things, I'll mention more things as we go through the rest of the review, but in general, I had a few points about the game that I had written down. I kept misjudging where the midpoint would be. Which is something that I want to talk about for a second. I was worried the game was going to end prematurely. I was really worried it was going to end at the halfway point after you fight Volron, which in hindsight wouldn't have happened because they really set up the second half of the game very well. Like, throughout the first half of the game, they're dropping hints about how they're going to have to find ways to lift the world back on its feet after they've liberated it, and that they still have Rena and Lennigus literally looming over you the entire game. They are literally over your heads the entire game. It is a giant sign that the game can't end until they've been dealt with. But I was very worried that the game was going to end before I ever got to that, because I knew that it was rushed in development, and I thought maybe they just made it a shorter game. They didn't. Luckily, it ended well. It ended tying everything together, which was nice. I do think, generally speaking, most of the game is quite strong in its writing. I do think that the point right after the halfway point, after they've taken a month's break in Ganatharos, is probably the weakest part of the game in terms of writing, because it's like the characters have taken a break for a month, but they're acting like you're the one who's been gone for a month. And they're trying to reintroduce you to the game and remind you of everything that's happened and what everyone is worried about. And it's so jarring because they're very obvious about it. They're saying a month has passed. Man, I can't believe this thing happened a month ago. We should really talk about this stuff that we could have talked about a month ago. It makes no sense. Like, they could have talked about this a month ago. Why are they talking about it now when 30 days have passed? Well, I'm assuming 30 days. You never know. But still, it was just weak. I did enjoy it in terms of the side quests that happened and how they were beginning to introduce the idea of what comes after and how they're going to rebuild the world, especially with helping the people of Pelesian. That's the name. Helping the people of Pelesian to overcome their brainwashing and everything. There was a plot quest with a woman burying her son that was really interesting, and the skit right after that with Law and Rinwell lives rent-free in my head. We'll get onto them later though. So there were aspects of the Ganatharos part that I really enjoyed, but the introduction to it specifically just felt very weak. So that was probably the weakest part of the game in my opinion. There were also a lot of information dumps later on as you went through Lenegis and Dake Faisal, which kind of makes sense because how else would they have given the information? But it did feel like a lot all at once, which I get. It's a difficult situation, but I think that, I don't know. I feel like the info dump was okay, probably. I don't know. But to speak more generally on the themes of the game again, I noticed as I was playing the theme of loss is heavily prevalent. Everyone has lost something, especially in the main party. Even Zephyr mentioned specifically that all he'd ever known was loss. But the game is not just about that loss that everyone has felt or the slavery that everyone has been captive to, but it is about overcoming that and finding a path forward, finding what comes after all of that. It has a lot of connections actually to real world issues, which is quite poignant. I've noticed this a lot in games and media recently. It really speaks to the idea that art is impacted by the cultural and societal context of the world surrounding the time of its creation. Or at least that's a note that I made when I was playing the game, which I still agree with. I think that this is definitely something that's come up a lot in games recently. You find that games that come out around the same time tend to have a lot of similarities and comparisons that can be drawn between them because of the cultural societal environment in which they were created, which I find fascinating. And Arise certainly does that as well with the themes that it explores. I really enjoy that aspect of the game. Another note that I made was about how the game specifically is about slavery, but it explores so many different aspects of what it means to be a slave and how you can be a slave in ways that are not just the literal physical sense of being a slave, but are also psychological in a sense. The note that I've got here is Arise is about systemic slavery on various levels that everyone is affected by, hierarchies, etc., with the notion being that the only way of fixing that broken system is to burn it down and rebuild it from the ground up. It's not just physical slavery or manual labor, it's psychological slavery and literal and metaphorical brainwashing and loss of free will. These are all things that the game goes really in depth with in terms of its plot. It really sticks to those things. It has a lot to do with the idea of free will and trying to explore the nuances of people, trying to show how neither side is better than the other, in a sense, even if one is more accountable in terms of what they've done to the other. I don't know, I feel like they were really trying to create a narrative that wasn't just black or white and has so much more nuance to it, and I feel like that's prevalent in every aspect of the game. I really enjoy thinking about it, to be honest. It's so complex. It's really good, actually. Of course, that doesn't mean the game isn't without its flaws. Sometimes it is a little bit overt with what it's trying to say. It does have repetition, quite a lot of things where the characters will say things several times over, so it really hammers home what it's trying to say sometimes. But I feel like that's not the worst thing the game does, to be honest. I feel like it's tolerable. To be honest, I'm more disappointed with the way that the villains were rushed. There certainly felt like there was a wasted potential with the villains. This is something that the directors of the game have already spoken about and acknowledged, but to be honest, it was due to the rushed development of the game. I'm glad that they put their effort into the main cast then, if that's the case, because if they'd put more effort into the villains, then perhaps the main cast wouldn't have been fleshed out as much, and I would have been drawn to the game as much if the villains were more interesting than the main party, if that makes any sense. So while I'm sad that there was some wasted potential there, I'm glad that the main party didn't suffer for it as well. That doesn't mean that the main party's perfect. I still think that there was a lack of depth in the backstories of the main party. I still have so much more I would have liked to know, especially with Rinwell's mage clan being the main thing that I really wanted to know more about. But also, like, I've got so many questions about Shionne, about how she got to Dana and everything. I'm sure everyone does. I want to know more about Alphen's past 300 years ago. To be fair, the amnesia thing is kind of an excuse not to do that, but still, it would have been nice. I want to know more about dohalim's life on Lenegus. That would have been cool. And I mean, I would have loved to see more of Law and Zephyr together, but obviously Law made that impossible. And for Kisara as well, I would have liked to see her and Miguel together a lot more. But, you know, these things we can't do much about, to be honest. I still like what they gave us, but I feel like I wanted more as well, if that makes any sense. Kind of tied into plot is side quests. I feel like the side quests were really good in this game. They had so much incentive to do them. I like that they actually told you what you get from each of the side quests in the little menu thing. It really gave me a reason to do most of the side quests, because a lot of them were Zoogle fights, but you get a lot of gold for them, and gold is hard to come by. So I did end up doing all of the side quests, and I feel like I really gained a lot from that, not just in terms of like gold and levels and things, but a lot of them had more character development as well, which is what I live for. I love the main cast so much that every time I found a new side quest, it would make me hope that there would be more development for the cast through those side quests, and a lot of the time I was proven right and given lots of character development as an incentive for doing the side quests. I highly enjoyed doing them. The wedge lights in particular were quite interesting in terms of the side quests. I think that it's nice that they were side quests rather than forced plot devices, even though the fact that they came down was part of the plot. The only one you had to fight as part of the plot was the fire one, because that was in Berg Volcano, but the other ones were all optional. And I quite enjoyed that because they were high level. It would have been difficult to do all of them before the final boss if you were just rushing through the game. But because they were optional, it felt like I wanted to do them more. Just speaking from the experience of a previous Tales game having given you a side quest that then becomes a plot thing that you must do for the plot later on, so it begins to feel tedious when it becomes required. So it was nice that that didn't happen for Tales of Arise with the wedge lights. I did also enjoy the character development we got out of them. My favourite would probably be the Wind Temple, because Farewell Mage is one of my favourite side quests. If I were to talk about my favourite side quests, they would all be to do with Rinwell and Law, because I'm biased, but yes, it would be Farewell Mage and Mixed Feelings, Phantom Flower of Nevera, of course. God, there's probably others, but those are like the three top ones that I just adore. You know what else, actually? I didn't make a note about this, but the artifacts. I actually really enjoyed looking for the artifacts, not in terms of like specifically trying to find them. I think they were fairly easy to find most of the time. You seemed to get them quite naturally just by looking in chests and things and doing the training grounds and other various things, but you were given more incentive to do it by the skits that came along with them. Lots of development for specifically Rinwell and dohalim, but later on you got some Kisara and Law moments in there as well. Just, there was so much incentive to find all of them. I really enjoyed it, actually. As for the post-game, there was a lack of content, of course, which is understandable and has been acknowledged. The development was rushed, they could only make 2 side quests. What we did get in those 2 side quests, though, was really, really good. The post-game dungeon, I think might be my favourite post-game dungeon out of the Tales games so far. I really enjoyed it because it really paid homage to the previous Tales games by showing past areas from past Tales games with this idea of it being different worlds from different rifts. I really enjoyed that. It was so cool to see all those cameos, and then of course the cameo fights against the characters you got there were fantastic. I'm biased, but you know, I really enjoyed what we got there. And then the second side quest with the memory machine, I really enjoyed. It was difficult. I barely got through it, but it was really fun to fight against all of the lords again, and then to have that resolution with Zephyr at the end. I felt like that really paid off, and it gave me something that I'd been wanting to see. So I really enjoyed that side quest as well. Yeah, generally speaking, plot and side quests, fantastic. They're a big part of why I love the game so much. But what I love even more than all of that is the characters, because they are really what brings the story to life more than anything. And to be honest, this cast is one of my favourites in a Tales game so far. I think because it's a smaller party, it's a lot more focused, so each of the characters was able to get more development that way, and I really enjoyed how much development each of them got. I think that all of them, generally speaking, got a really good amount of development throughout the game and characterization. I think the ones who were in the party for longest tended to get more, so you got a lot more for Alphen and Shionne because they were kind of the main protagonists, but I feel like Rinwell and Law also got quite a fair amount, and that dohalim and kisara maybe got the least, but still an okay amount. Kisara specifically I feel like didn't get much, but we'll get onto that later. So for now I want to talk about each character in terms of their design, personality, combat, and character arcs, and also just a few other notes I have from as I was playing through the game, because there's just so much to say about each of these characters. So let's begin with Alphen, our protagonist. To be honest, I didn't know what to expect when we started the game. I thought he was going to be stoic and kind of boring, but he wasn't, which I very much enjoy. I like his design a lot. All of the main party members have, actually I think even the side characters have an animal motif that they are associated with. Alphen's one's actually really interesting. I looked up an interview about this recently. He has a dragon motif. Most of the characters have realistic animal motifs, if that makes any sense, but a dragon is a fantasy creature. Alphen, I think, is the only one who has a fantasy creature as his motif, at least in the main party, but it's because of how it transcends reality and humanity, kind of in reflection to Alphen himself as a 300-year-old, you know? But I feel like the dragon motif is most relevant in his second outfit, so we'll get to that in a minute. But his general design, he's beefy. He's very beefy. He's the beefiest of the characters. It's quite interesting. But he was a soldier in his past, so that makes sense. His hair's an absolute mess. And he looks more stoic than he should be. It's interesting having the mask as a part of his character. It's certainly something they must have had to work around quite a lot as they were designing him. I found it interesting how it was incorporated into the main scenes of the game, because I played through the game twice, as I've said before. The second time that I played through, I noticed you could put him in any of the masks, the states of the mask that you wanted throughout the game, so you could have him be Iron Mask the entire game if you wanted, or you could have him be maskless throughout the entire game. But the main story cutscenes would always have him in the mask he should have at that point in the story, which makes sense, but it's still kind of sad. Because I would have liked to have him be Iron Mask at the end of the game. I thought that would have been hilarious, but c'est la vie, can't do it, oh well. So the first outfit that you have for Alphen is his slave outfit, which I think is quite interesting. I like that it has the pop of blue on it with the scarf. I don't really know. I think the original concept for it was that it was a remnant of his mother's, but then they changed his design more, so that I think got scrapped. This is from the interview that I was reading anyway. But it was a lot of torn clothing, showing that he's strong and having that hint of blue that is always present in Alphen's outfits, because of course it is. His second outfit, being the Crimson Crow's uniform, is really interesting actually. It's reminiscent of Zephyr. I mean, I understand that most of the Crimson Crows have similar outfits, but specifically they've chosen a design for him that is meant to reflect Zephyr in a sense. There's not much armor there, which perhaps reflects his naive outlook at the time due to his amnesia. He's only just beginning to rebel against the slavery he's been under for the past year that he's had any memories for. But also he has these blacksmith's gloves. Well, they're just big gloves, but they are reminiscent of a blacksmith, which I think is really interesting with his enthusiasm for forging weapons, and also the fact that he uses the blazing sword, which is kind of like, again, reminiscent of forging things in flames with stone, I guess, like a blacksmith. I don't know, I just thought that was really interesting. And then after Zephyr dies, you get the armor for him, the black armor, which is where the dragon motif really comes into play. It has a lot of scale aspects. It's his kind of main outfit, to be honest. There are things around his hips that are spiky. I don't know exactly what they are, but they make me think of dragons, so I guess it worked. He has a cape, it's blue, that's fun. Well, I guess it's a scarf, but yeah, it's blue. But the fact that he's covered head to toe in armour at that point is kind of reflective of his strength and resolve to push past the hardships that he has faced and to keep fighting even when he has lost one of the most important people in his life at that point, because Zephyr is really his lodestar, the person he's been really wanting to learn so much from. And now that he's lost him, he doesn't have that to follow, he has to find his own path. So the fact that he's got so much armour at that point really reflects his strength and resolve. But it's also a looming reminder of his past regrets and assumed heroism because of how much he hates wearing the armour. Not hates wearing the armour, but feels wrong wearing the armour because it was the armour of a presumed damned hero. So now he's got this kind of heroic title thrust upon him that he feels the pressure to live up to while also feeling that he can't because of his past, which is really interesting. It's like his hesitance for being seen as a hero because of his past regrets of what happened on Lenegis. It's really fascinating. I do still wonder about what the origin of the armor really was, but I think it makes sense that we don't get really told because a lot of the history has been lost. It would have been cool to know though. And then the last outfit he gets, the Gam Arthalis. I think that's what it's called anyway. It almost looks princely, which is reflective of his sovereignty, being the sovereign, but it also lends itself to a sort of fairy tale vibe, which I think really works with, at that point, his main desires being save the world, but also shionne. So it's kind of a fairy tale hero rather than a legendary battle hero, if that makes any sense. I also like that it includes not only white, of course, but red, which is Shionne's colour. It does have little bits of blue on there as well, but the kind of main colour pop is the red, which is mirrored with Shionne's outfit at the time, having more blue on it. We'll get to that later, of course. But generally speaking, I think the outfit really reflects his acceptance of his role as the sovereign in using his ability to try and save the world and Shionne. And really like embracing that as a part of himself, because up until that point he's been trying to learn more about what it even means, what his past is, trying to come to terms with that. So at the point that he gets the outfit, it's where he really takes on that role and decides he's going to use that for the benefit of the world. I really enjoy that. Anyway, now that we've spoken about his design for ages, his personality. He's not at all stoic. I thought he was going to be really stoic and boring. He was not at all stoic. I really enjoyed Alphen's character. He's kind of, not to say he's a himbo, but he's kind of a himbo. But he's very fun. He has a playful side, a teasing side, but he's also very dedicated and kind and good-natured. He cares so much about other people, which is so nice. Like, it really gives you a reason to believe that he would go out and do what he's doing, even though he doesn't want to be seen as a hero. He's doing this not because of a heroic status or anything, but because he really wants people to not have to suffer anymore. And I think that's really such a good character trait for him. And it really makes you believe that he would do these things, because most people wouldn't. I also quite like how his personality changes before and after he gets his memories, but also like with the pain as well. He's a little bit more irritative and mature after he loses his sense of not having pain, regains his sense of pain and his memories. But it's really reflective of his character arc as he continues to struggle with his lack of memories and the guilt of his past as he remembers things from it, the regrets that he has of what happened on Lenegis, everyone who died because of him, and trying to push past that and create a better world. I really love his character arc throughout the game. I love seeing his resolve strengthen as you progress through the game, as he learns what he wants to fight for and what his real purpose is, because he doesn't just want to save the slaves of the world, but he wants to ensure that there's no more sacrifice in order for others to be happy, and that's just such a key theme of the game. I really enjoy that in his character. My original theory actually for Alphen, I've spoken about it a little bit, but I think I cut out quite a bit of it when I was playing the game. My original theory was that Alphen was half Renin. I feel like the game intentionally did that as a red herring, and I fell for it real hard. But it's kind of impossible to guess what the truth would have been because you don't know that much about anything. Like, there's no way of guessing that there's a sovereignty that's different from what we know the sovereign to be. So it's impossible to guess the truth, but that just makes it more captivating when you do find out the real reason why he has that glowing eye sometimes. Also, one of my theories as I played through was that the person in his memories, the little flashbacks we get, I didn't think it was Shionne. Sometimes I flip-flopped between thinking it was and thinking it wasn't. But because Shionne didn't know anything about Alphen, even though Alphen seemed to know her, I kind of guessed it wasn't Shionne. The voice was also different, so I felt like it had to be someone else. Yeah, I think I was thrown off by the fact that they had a similar outfit. The person in Alphen's memories, Naori, and also Shionne. I specifically made a note that it was a similar dress, but that's also just the old fashion of Rena, because Shionne specifically says the dress that she chooses in the ruins is old-fashioned, which makes a lot more sense when you realise that it's Naori from 300 years ago, because of course she's going to be wearing old-fashioned clothing. It was 300 years ago. It just makes so much sense. Of course, it's funny knowing what the outfit is later on, but it does have a more old-fashioned feel to it, I suppose. Actually, speaking of that, the other thing I made a note about was the first opening has a shot of Alphen during the moment on Lenegus where everyone dies, where everything is falling apart, and there's a reflection in his eye of a silhouette with a feathery shoulder. At the time, I thought it was Volron. Because of all the feathers, I thought that he had to have something to do with Alphen's past. I think that was maybe another red herring because it ended up being Naori, who also has feathers on one shoulder. But I did think it was gonna be Volron at one point, which I thought was interesting. I also thought that the revelation of what exactly happened in his past would either be the midpoint of the game or his darkest moment, which is interesting. I suppose it kind of was Alphen's darkest moment because it's really the moment where he almost gives up, like after he finds everything out about that. Yeah, that makes sense. Anyway, continuing on. Yeah, as I continued through the game after that point, I did continue to worry that Alphen was going to have to do something self-sacrificing towards the end of the game in order to save Shionne or to have her thorns be ended, or that his age might catch up to him. I didn't expect the ending to be happy at all, but it's so meaningful that Alphen doesn't have to sacrifice himself because specifically he doesn't want a world with sacrifice, he wants to have a world without sacrifice. So it means a lot more for him to be able to find a way to save the world without having to sacrifice anything. It lends itself more to the meaning of the game, which I find really fascinating. Anyway, with all of that interesting stuff out of the side, let's talk about his combat for a second, because I kind of forgot to talk about that earlier. He's generally a very strong all-rounder. He's the protagonist, of course. He's a general sword user, but his sword attacks feel very impactful. I thought he was very easy to play as. Well, maybe not very easy, quite easy to play as. He's probably the easiest one to pick up if you haven't played as any of them before, which is good because he's the protagonist. But I really enjoyed playing as him. He has HP draining abilities and I didn't use them that often. Pretty much everything he does with the Blazing Sword technically drains his HP, but he has specifically Flaming Edge burst attacks. I don't remember exactly what they're called. I didn't use them very much. Apparently they're very strong, but I kept dying, so... Which makes sense plot-wise. It makes sense, especially when you can't feel pain, but come on. Like, there's a certain plot relevance to the Blazing Sword throughout the game and why Alphen can use it, why he's the only one who can. And also, it's such an interesting handicap at the points where he doesn't have it in Messia 224 when you can't use it, and also later on when you're around Dohalim before you find Shionne again. It becomes more difficult to fight as him, which shows how much he's been relying on it, to be honest. But he has to strengthen his resolve again before he can use it. It links into the combat. The combat and the story link together so well. It's so good. I do also like that once you find out he's the Sovereign, some of his arts, especially the Flaming Edge bursts and his mystic arts, show his Sovereign symbol. That's fun. Little neat plot things. So with Alphen out of the way, let's talk a little bit about Shionne. Shionne's design is really interesting. Her animal motif is a rabbit, which at first I thought was a little odd. I couldn't really tell from her outfit. She has a DLC gun that has a little rabbit on it. It's called the Rabbit Matchlock, so that kind of links in. But for her outfit itself doesn't really have any rabbit imagery. It kind of has, if you're talking about her second outfit, it kind of has a ribbon and a bustle at the back that I guess you could say looks like a tail, maybe. But it's not like her hair has anything rabbit-y about it. She does wear a lot of white, maybe. But I think from what I've seen from interviews and things, the general motif of the rabbit for her is the fact that she will die if left alone. Like, that's the thing that they mention the most about it, because apparently rabbits can die of loneliness, and Shionne's whole thing is that if she was left alone without her friends, then she would literally die, because her whole mission was to die, which is more of a personality thing, I guess, more than a design thing. But I guess that makes sense. But let's talk about her outfits, because she's clearly the most fashionable character, being a fashionista herself. Her first outfit is very simple, actually. It's a nice white dress. It's very classy. I don't know whether the white is supposed to represent the rabbit thing, or if it's supposed to be purity, or just her being a blank slate, because she is kind of hard to read, so you can't tell what she's like. I'm not sure. It does have a little bit of a thorn motif around the waist with the detailing there, but generally speaking it's just very simple, which I think is nice, and it makes sense for that point in the game. But I do like that her outfit becomes more complex as you play through the game, especially after you go through the ruins and get her second outfit, the dress with the red on it. I don't remember what it's called, the scarlet something or other. It's really pretty. The white on top of the red is interesting because it's kind of hiding her passionate emotions, which are represented by the red, beneath the main white of her dress. She's hiding the feelings within her underneath her exterior, and that's also reflected in the fact that her outfit has quite a bit of armor on it. It has the metal breastplate, it has the shoulder pauldrons, it has a metal choker thing. The choker and the detailing on the bodice part of her dress have a lot of thorn imagery in there, which at first I thought was a little bit strange that she would choose to wear something with thorn imagery if she thought it was a curse. But the more I think about it, the more I wonder if it was perhaps her way of trying to be the master of her thorns and to use them as an armor to push other people away, in a sense. Because she does kind of do that. She uses her thorns as a threat to people, and they are the thing that keeps people away, because at the point that she wears that outfit, she is trying to push people away from her. She doesn't want others to get too close, because then they'll get hurt. Which is interesting then when we get to her third outfit, which I don't think she chose for herself, but I'm not 100% sure. It's the black dress, has like a halter neck top and a thorn pattern across the fabric itself, but unlike the metallic detailings on her previous outfits, the thorns are actually a part of the fabric, which is showing how it's not something that is an armoured exterior that she's using to push people away, but it's something that is part of her that seems to be consuming her almost, which at the point that she wears that dress it is, because it's her darkest, well, one of her darkest moments, certainly. So they're not even just an armour, they're consuming her. And of course, black, darkness, loneliness, all of the things that represents are within that outfit as well. She does actually go back to her red and white dress after that, which is again lending itself to the idea that she's still pushing people away, especially with Alphen at that point no longer not being able to feel pain. He can feel pain again. So she's pushing him away even more, because she has to be more trying to get the Reddit Alma, especially after they lose the Reddit Alma. She's even more determined to find it so that she can do what she needs to do, at least until everything blows up at Berg Volcano and she tells them the truth. After which point we finally get her fourth outfit, which is a stark contrast to all of her previous ones. It's of course Nayori's previous outfit, it's the Maiden's outfit, and as I said before, it has a lot of white and blue being Alphen's colour. There's actually no red on it at all, which I think is really interesting, but I think it's possibly to do with the fact that her determination is no longer this passionate burning need to try and get the Reddit Alma so that she can die, but instead it's a strengthened resolve to find a path forward that doesn't involve that. The blue perhaps represents calm or wisdom, I'm not 100% sure, but it's pretty. Actually, what I find really interesting about the outfit, it has no armor. The previous outfits, well, there was a little bit of armor on her main outfit, but this outfit doesn't have any armor at all. It's her being a lot more open to other people at that point and no longer pushing others away. It's kind of reflected in the outfit. I'm really stretching things here, but I just think it's really neat how they've implemented that into her design. So I have spoken a little bit about her personality just by virtue of talking about her outfits, but she starts off closed off, pushing people away. With hindsight, you totally get it. Because you understand that she's doing it specifically because of the way that she's grown up, the way that she's been treated in the past, and also the fact that she knows she needs to die, or at least she believes she needs to die. It really explains why she's not good with people, why she's so brusque and closed off at the beginning, why she argues so much. She genuinely has such compassion within her heart. She really cares about people, and I think that's reflected in the fact that she has healing arts, which we'll get to in a moment. Because healing arts are generally a sign of someone who's a very caring sort of character, because it's healing, you know? It makes sense. It's a reflection of compassion towards other people, but Shionne's interesting because she has that compassion, but she has to push it down so much. It's only towards the end of the game that she really gets to start showing that compassion towards the other party members and doing things like cooking things that are filled with love because she really wants to show how much she appreciates the others, or having even stronger healing arts because she wants them all to stay alive. Kind of thing, you know? So it really lends itself to the way her character arc works, as I've spoken about already a little bit. She is driven by her mission to die, but she then finds a reason to live as she goes through the game. And because of the struggles that she faces, because of how realistic and emotional it feels seeing all of these ups and downs with her and seeing her find her reason to live, but still feel like she has to die up until the point where Alphen promises her they're going to find a way for her not to die. It feels so meaningful to see her happy at the end, to see her be able to hug Rinwell and to be able to kiss Alphen and things, you know? It just felt so meaningful. I think the voice acting certainly helped with that, especially in the English dub. Erica Lindbeck knocked out of the park, as always. But I digress. I really love Shionne's character arc. There are a few moments specifically that are really interesting with her, especially with hindsight, because at the beginning of the game she really throws her life away, but she can't die, so like it's not super throwing her life away, she's very reckless with it. She jumps off a cliff when she's being chased by the Redded soldiers and the Crimson Crows. At one point Alphen says to her,
I don't get why you're so quick to throw it all away. Not when us slaves have never had a choice in whether we lived or died.
which is really interesting because at that point neither does Shionne, because she's been trying to die and can't. Which I find really sad, but intriguing as well. It's only with hindsight that you can really understand what's happening with her in those moments where she really is reckless. I mean, getting hit in the chest with an arrow and then brushing it off like it's nothing, and then throwing herself in front of Volron's sword and getting stabbed all the way through because she knows she can't die, but Alphen can, and she doesn't want him to die at that point, even if she would hide that from him because she wants to push him away. She's just really starting to care about him because he's the one person, the first person that she's ever met who hasn't pushed her away. Oh, I love them. I love them. Actually, tied into that as well is the fact that there is a contrast between her actions in Cislodia when they are about to go and fight Ganabel versus her actions in Menacea when they first meet Dohalim. When it comes to Ganabel, Shionne's very hesitant. She doesn't want to rush straight in. She wants to make sure that they have a plan before they go in because she needs that Master Core, and they're probably not going to get it if they don't have a plan. Whereas with Dohalim, the way that the party is acting and the way that Dohalim is presenting himself, there is a certain worry that they're not going to take Dohalim down because Menacea is seemingly united and peaceful as compared to their previous encounters in Cislodia and in Calaglia. But because Shionne really needs that Master Core, it's desperation that pushes her to then attempt to murk Dohalim on sight, as I have written. She only acts recklessly in those moments of desperation, knowing specifically that she can't die. So that's probably part of the reason why she's so upset that Alphen takes the hit for her at that point, because she went into that knowing that even if she got hit, she wouldn't die from it. But Alphen doesn't know that. So it's just, dramatic irony. I love it. Of course, I have so many questions about Shionne, as I mentioned before. I have questions about how her thorns work, how they're passed down. Is it through childbirth? Is it just generational? How does that work? Like, did they all have thorns as badly as Shionne did, or is Shionne the worst case of them thus far? I feel like Shionne must be the worst case because she has had experiments on her, but we don't specifically know anything about her ancestors other than Naori from 300 years ago. But I feel like if her previous ancestors all also had the same type of thorns, then surely they either wouldn't have had kids because of the experimentation or the pain of the thorns against another person. I'm not 100% sure. I feel like it must have just been growing and growing because the maiden's power was beginning to weaken over time, if that makes any sense. Oh, and also with the strength of the astral spirit growing over time as well, because she starts to lose control of the thorns as the game progresses. I think it must have been just a thing that's been happening over time. As I played through, I had so many questions about the thorns as I was playing through before they got explained. I thought that they might have been something to try and make Shionne a weapon. I thought that they might have been something that someone up on Lenegus could control because they were dark astral energy. Obviously those things were debunked. But yeah, no, I had a lot of questions, and I still got questions about her thorns. Also, how she got down to Dana as well, and why she was there, and why she was on the freight train, and why the Crimson Crows bust her off of it specifically. Just, I feel like there's still so much that we don't know about Shionne at the beginning of the game, and I would have liked to have a few of those questions answered, but I don't know if we ever will. I hope we do at some point. We'll see, we'll see. But I need to talk about her combat as well. I actually really enjoyed playing as Shionne. She kind of became my main go-to as I was playing the first part of the game the first time, which I didn't expect. But she has a really good balance between her melee art, well, I say melee, her long-range attacks and the spells that she has. Her guns and bombs, I really like them, actually. You chain a lot of the bombs in the air, which I really found really fun. I liked that they were different elements as well for the different bombs. I liked that you could use them just as were, or you could fire another shot to change the effect of the bomb. Just, she was really cool in actual melee combat, or long-range melee, you know, that kind of thing. But also her arts were good. I feel like she didn't have that many astral arts. I might be wrong, but she did have a lot more healing arts, so I suppose that balances it out. I still liked what astral arts she did have. Obviously, she's amazing at healing, which makes sense plot-wise because of her status as the maiden and her compassionate side and all of that. I think it's the maiden powers that really made her that good at healing, mostly because they comment on it sometimes, and dohalim specifically says how strong Shionne's healing arts are. I don't know, it's a really interesting contrast there, I think. The one thing I will say about Shionne in combat is that she gets targeted far too much in boss fights. Like, I understand that the boss is going to go after the player character, but if you're playing as her, it's hell. So I wouldn't recommend playing as her in a boss fight. I also feel like the AI for her was not great at conserving its SP, because she really wanted to use her strongest healing art all the time at one point when I was playing, and I didn't really have enough CP to really allow for that. I haven't actually spoken about CP at all. I liked the CP system. I thought it was good. I liked that it was just for the healing and support skills, because it felt more manageable than having each character have their own TP like they did in previous games. But it also gave an element of challenge of trying to balance between whether you wanted to use all of your CP and rely on your healing arts, or whether you wanted to use more items. It was really interesting, actually, having that balance there and having to think logically about what you wanted to use and what your last resort would be. To be fair, healing up your CP is free. Healing up your items, however, you have to use gold, and that's hard. So it did add a little bit of challenge there. It was interesting. Anyway, off topic. No, I really like Shionne. I think her personality and design is really interesting, and she was fun to play as in combat too. Now, not to be that person, but I really love Rinwell. She's genuinely one of my favorite characters in this game. I adore her so much. I've spoken about it a little bit before. I saw Rinwell's design in the initial marketing and things, and I kind of knew I would like her just from her design, because her design is just beautiful. She's got a butterfly motif, specifically Morpho butterfly, apparently, which is a genus of butterfly. I looked it up on Google Images, a lot of them are blue. They're pretty. And she's probably the most overt with her motif on her actual outfit. Like, it's all over the outfit. Obviously, you've got the golden butterfly on the front of her coat, you've got little butterflies at each side of her coat and on the middle back, just before where her two tails of the coat go out. You have a little butterfly on the collar of her tunic, the golden collar. Also the yellow shirt collar, you could see, kind of looks like wings, like a butterfly. She has socks, blue socks, that have little butterflies on them. Her shoes have butterflies on the soles. It's everywhere. She wears a butterfly hairpin. Her book has a butterfly on it. The wings of her necklace are like butterfly wings. But I think actually the most interesting aspect of her outfit that is butterfly themed is the actual shape of the coat itself. Because of the four flaps of it, like, you've got two parts at the front and then the two tails at the back. If you laid it out flat on the ground, it looks like butterfly wings, which I think is really neat. Can you tell I've looked into her outfit a little bit too much? But It's just such a beautiful design. Of course, they've got the spellcaster and mage elements in her design as well. She has a big hood, which is typical mage, also with the tails kind of resembling a cloak, but it's a coat instead, so it's actually really interesting to have that kind of difference there, you know, because they have to have the mage elements in there to make it obvious. But also what I find really interesting about her design is the kind of the strips of fabric. Shionne mentions it when she's talking about Rinwell's outfit in one of the camping dialogues as you go into Cislodia, but her outfit has a lot of emphasis on strips of fabric, especially on the tunic itself and on her arm bands, sleeve things. I guess the tunic has 6 strips at the front and 6 strips at the back, and both of the arm fabric things are made up of 6 strips of fabric as well, all in the same blue. I think that might be reminiscent of the fact that there are 6 elements of astral energy. I don't know, maybe I'm making a stretch here. But I think it's supposed to reflect something about that. Also, the fact they've got runes on it is another spellcaster thing, I guess. But no, it's mostly the 6 strips thing. I think is supposed to resemble or reflect the different elements of astral energy, which I think is really neat. Also, of course, her outfit is just filled with blue. Obviously, there's the shade of blue that's on all the strips of fabric. There's the darker blue that's on her coat. I think that's supposed to be reflective of the notion of intelligence and knowledge, because that is one of the connotations of blue as a colour in colour theory. But I think it does have a lot to do with knowledge and intelligence, and considering how much Rinwell is based upon the ideas of, you know, like loving history and learning more and everything. It just makes sense. Yeah, I don't know. I could talk about her design forever. I love Rinwell's design. It's just so pretty. It's so pretty. The gold accents, love them. Gorgeous. Really give a beautiful pop to the outfit. Oh, and her books. I adore her books. Every single one of them. They're all beautiful. Secrets of the Stars is obviously my favourite though, because it ties into her outfit, but I just love all of her books. But to talk about her personality, Rinwell's really interesting and also really divisive. She starts off very closed off and very distrusting and very closed-minded. We'll talk a little bit more about her character arc later on. Beneath the cold exterior that she wears, she is actually quite friendly. She's compassionate, she's earnest, she's eager to learn. She likes to tease. She does have a childish aspect to her, of course, being a child, well, a teen, you know, beneath all of the things that she's hiding. And as you get to know her more, you can understand why she is the way she is, because her character arc is just so nuanced. There's so much depth. I love her. She's so good. So she does begin as kind of off-putting. The game puts a lot of focus and emphasis on her hating Renans, which, yeah, she does at the start of the game, and it's fairly clear as you go through. They make it very obvious how she feels, but also, this is to do with her character arc, because she, as you learn, like, the truth of why she's doing everything in Niaz, it just makes so much sense why she is like that, and why she is so adamant upon hating Renans, because she obviously begins being closed off to everyone, but very distrusting of Renan specifically, of Shionne especially, and then a little bit of dohalim when he arrives, but, like, by that point she's already beginning to struggle in those beliefs, because she thought that all Renans were bad, but Shionne has, like, healed her and things, and is trying to help them overcome slavery, and she doesn't know how to consolidate that in her mind. And then there's Dohalim, who is a lord but is also wanting coexistence between Renans and Danans, but also he's doing it for his own selfish purposes, but also he kind of means it and he clearly regrets so much. We're getting to Dohalim later. So Rinwell kind of continues to be caught in this conflict in her mind between the beliefs that she's held onto for so long and the new bonds that she's experiencing with her friends as she continues to travel, the new things she's learning about other people and trying to be more open towards them. And I think once you learn about her past in Niaz, it becomes really clear that throughout the game, her insistence upon that, especially as you get into Mahaksar, is a lot to do with her clinging on to what she knows. You can really tell she's trying so hard to grasp the hatred that's kept her going this whole time, because subconsciously she knows that if she doesn't have that, she'll be left with nothing. She just hasn't considered that such a thing could still happen once she's gotten her revenge, that she might still be left with nothing after everything is gone. Like, she uses hatred as her crutch through the beginning of the game because it's the only thing that she has left. She's already lost her entire family and she feels she has no purpose. So she clings on to hatred as a purpose for herself. It's fascinating to see how that changes throughout the game, because especially after Niaz, she really begins to open up and start thinking more critically and to begin trying to understand other people more. And seeing her overcome that previous hatred and grow as a person and begin to open up to others is just fascinating to me. It really ties in as well to her relationship with herself and her magic being a huge part of her identity. Just, oh god, I love her. I'm trying not to go too in depth about this at the moment because I have already written an analysis that specifically details Rinwell and Law's developments. That'll come out eventually. But I love her so much. She's just got so much of a depth to her character. It's a shame that a lot of people were put off with her at the beginning and thus just didn't like her for the rest of the game. I don't know whether that's just a vocal minority or if it's like a lot of people. I feel like it's fairly obvious if you played a video game that you should just trust the narrative in those situations. Like, it's a main party member. They're not going to have her be like that the entire game. Certainly not in a Tales game. It was clear that she was going to grow past that at some point, I think. That being said, I had some theories as I played through the game, which was interesting. I was trying to think at one point about who the traitor would be if they went with a traitor in this game, because they tend to do that a lot in Tales games where one of the party members will betray the others. They didn't really do that in Tales of Arise. There were kind of moments Shionne almost left everyone behind, but it's not really a case of there being a traitor specifically, which I like. But I did wonder if Rinwell might be the traitor because of her hatred towards Renans. This was before everything happened in Niaz, of course. And it was also tied into my theory about alphen being half Renan. I thought that if Rinwell found out about that she'd be really upset. Luckily she's more nuanced than that, so that was nice. But that was my kind of main theory when it came to Rinwell. I did notice a few other things as well when I was going through it the second time. I noticed that when Rinwell uses her magic in Messiah 224, I think that was probably her first time using magic, like, properly in front of other people. Maybe even since her family died. I think she probably used her magic a little bit when she was traveling by herself to Calaglia so that she could fight the Zoogles, because of her reaction when the others ask how she got there without being attacked by the Zoogles. She probably used her magic against them. But it's really, in Messiah 224, that's the moment where she reveals herself as a mage to other people, and after that she has to use her magic so much and to actually rely on it, which she's not really done before because she's never been allowed to use her magic because of the way that her family was hidden. So it must be really tough for her in the first few parts of the game when she goes through Cyslodia to use her magic so much and to have to rely on it because she hates it that much, especially because she hates it. I think it must have been really tough for her. One of the other things I noticed, of course, is that they're very overt about having Rinwell react to the Lord's crests, but you only really notice it, at least the first one, in, like, hindsight. So obviously with Ganabelt she reacts quite, like, obviously, but I think that one's an interesting one because in English it's not super clear why she's shocked, because she says something about...
No, he can't be.
No, it can't be what, Rinwell? She never really says anything. But in the Japanese dub, I think the nuance of it is a little bit different. I think it's more of like a it's not kind of thing. I have to double check that, to be honest, but there's a slight variance in it which makes it a little bit clearer that what's happening there isn't Rinwell being shocked at him using a crest or anything. It's the fact that the crest isn't the one that she's looking for. She thought that Ganabelt would be the one who killed her family, naturally speaking, because she grew up in Cyslodia, her family was from Cyslodia. It just makes sense that it would be the Cyslodian lord who killed her family. But at the same time, it's not. So that's why she's shocked. But then you get to just after that, when she asks Alphen about the lord in Calaglia, what he was like, and Alphen just happens to mention what his crest was like, and you see Rinwell's reaction to that. At the time, you probably don't think that much about it, but in hindsight, it's clear that she just wanted to know because she previously didn't care. She thought that Ganabelt was going to be the one that she was going to get revenge against, but now she knows it has to be one of the other lords. So she needs to know, was it the guy in Calaglia? because he's already gone, but it wasn't him. And then of course she reacts when she sees Dohalim's crest and looks crestfallen as she realizes he's also not the one that she is looking for. I think some part of her probably realised that Dohalim wouldn't be the one that she was looking for even before she saw his crest, simply because he is clearly allowing for Medicia to be a place for coexistence, and that doesn't really go with the idea that she has in her mind of someone who killed her parents, you know? I mean, she's quite adamant about the fact that maybe they're like being duped by the Renans there, which she technically is correct about. In terms of the fruit of Helgen and the food and everything. But the main thing is the fact that Dohalim is not really like the others. So I think some part of her probably, at least deep down, knew that Dohalim wouldn't be who she was looking for. So then the game itself makes it clear when you get out of Mahagsar that Rinwell probably knows there's a 50-50 chance that the next lord could be her family's murderer. They make it clear that there's something up with her, at least, and in hindsight you know that must be what it is. Oh, it's just really fascinating to me. Yeah, I guess the other thing about Rinwell I've not really spoken about is her relationship with Hootle. I think it's very cute. I think it's so sweet that she has her one little friend because she has no other friends before that point, which is really sad. Like, she has this whole side plot with Hootle in the Owl Forest. They make it quite clear that she's probably considering making Hootle stay in the Owl Forest once they've found all of the owls, and she does. But then he comes back. It's very sweet. I love that side quest. Her relationship with Hootle is just very cute. I love that they're always joined at the hip and that they kind of reflect each other. I don't know, it's just really cool. Also, another thing that's interesting about the dub variants is the little asides that Rinwell has to Hootle, especially at the beginning of the game when she's going through like the Rudier Forest when they get into there, and as they're about to leave Cyslodia with Law, she has little asides where she speaks to Hootle. In the English dub, they generally sound pretty cheerful, I would say.
Don't worry, Hootle. It's okay. Here we go, Hootle.
But in Japanese, they're kind of more subdued.
大丈夫だよ、フルル。行くよ、フルル。
I feel like it reflects her feelings at the points in the game in different ways, which I think is really interesting. Like, especially with the one in Cyslodia, because in English she sounds very cheerful, but in Japanese, I think it reflects the fact that she is going with them on this journey not for pleasure, but for vengeance. I don't know if that was like something that they intentionally did with the Japanese dub that maybe just didn't get put into the direction for the English dub, but it's just a little interesting nuance there. Anyway, with her personality finally talked to death about, her combat. Actually, Rinwell became one of my mains towards the end of the game. I love playing as Rinwell. I've played as her in Law mostly during my second playthrough. I just really love playing as her. She's so versatile. Obviously her astral arts are incredibly powerful, but also her melee attacks. I love them a lot. And you can switch between them really easily, especially with the hydration orb art that pushes you back away from the enemies. You can use that to switch into casting spells, which is really smooth and really cool. I also love the way her arts work with stealing spells from enemies and charging her arts and being able to combine them into higher level arts depending on which ones you have stored in her book to charge. You can get some really amazing combos, and I feel like it means you can have more spells available even though you've only got certain ones set. So you could use, for example, this is off the top of my head so it might be wrong, you could use Thunderblade, or you could use Holy Lance, or you could charge Thunderblade and then use Holy Lance and get a higher level spell kind of thing, you know? I think that's really interesting. I think it makes her even more powerful as a spellcaster. She's fantastic. And her arts just look really cool. Her melee ones in particular, I adore looking at. Electric Discharge, I think it's called. That one is probably my favorite of her melee arts. It just looks so cool. But no, generally speaking, I love playing as Rinwell. I think she's so much fun. Kind of tied into Rinwell is Hootle, of course. I love him. He's adorable, he's really cute. He has a little pendant which is, it has a butterfly on it tying into Rinwell's thing. I think it's probably meant to be something to do with her mage clan. His eyes are huge and kind of creepy, but that makes sense because he's an owl and they are kind of creepy at times because of the way that they stare, but he's also managed to be really cute at the same time. He's also very expressive in all the skits that he's in, which is pretty much all of the ones that Rinwell is in. Also the blue in his antenna kind of ties back into the blue in Rinwell's outfit, which I think is really neat. I love his character. He's cute, he's fun, he's got links to Rinwell with the way that he distrusts others at the beginning, but then slowly opens up to them over the course of the game. He has a rivalry with Law, which is hilarious. I love the way that he mirrors and reacts with Rinwell through a lot of the skits, even if he's not particularly important to the skits. He's always there. He's a staple. I'm not going to talk a whole bunch about Hootle. I've already done a whole analysis video on him, which sounds strange, I'm aware. It's actually... it was an April Fool's joke that turned into a more sincere analysis than I expected it to be as I was creating it. And I actually think it's a fairly in-depth analysis of Hootle if you're interested in seeing that. I'll put a link in the card. It exists. Anyway, we shall move swiftly on to Law. I didn't expect to like him. I didn't expect to like him. He grew on me so quickly. I really like Law. He's probably... him and Rinwell are tied for my first favorite character in the game. Sometimes I think Law is better, sometimes I think Rinwell is better. I can't decide between them, so they're tied. I love them both, but yeah, Law. His design is really interesting. He has a dog motif, specifically a dog. Zephyr has a wolf motif. Law has the dog motif. I find that quite funny. Of course, this is very, very, very relevant to his outfit. He has a wolf on his shoulder. That's like the most characteristic detail of his outfit, especially in like the fact that he bought it for 10 gold and it is a talking point, but it just is so characteristic. If you take it off him, it looks wrong. But he also has like fur around his collar, you know, like a dog. His hair is a wild style, like a dog. It has a tail. The soles of his shoes have paws on them. The little symbol on the back of his tunic kind of looks like a tail. Kind of like a Shiba Inu tail, actually. It's kind of cute. But in addition to that, he also wears a lot of like chains and belts around his waist that are very unnecessary, and he has like colour through his hair, like the pink in his hair. He has little beads. His outfit just looks like something that a 16-year-old would find cool, which makes a lot of sense because he is a 16-year-old, so he's a freaking nerd. But it feels very accurate to his character. It feels like it has a lot of that kind of youthful, rebellious charm, I guess, if that makes any sense. I really like actually this outfit is, on the outside it looks quite subdued. There's like a calm purple being associated with wisdom and kind of a meditative state, which makes sense with the fact that he's surprisingly wise and the fact that his fighting style requires a sort of meditative state to that, but we'll get back to that later as well. But then the inside of it has this vivid orange yellow color on the inside of his tunic, which really reflects his vivacious personality. Also, the detailing on the inside of his tunic is really beautiful, and it's a shame that you can hardly ever see it, to be honest. There are pictures of it in the art book. It's gorgeous. It does have a little cameo from a certain character from totally not from a Tales game. Never seen him before in my life. I don't know who he is. It is a dog, because of course. But no, I really love Law's design, actually. It's really interesting to compare and contrast that his regular outfit with the Snake Eyes uniform he wears at the beginning, which is a lot more dull in color, a lot more covered up. It feels less like him, I guess, if that makes sense. It's less characteristic. So it's interesting to have that contrast between the two. Another detail, of course, that I must mention is that Law fortifies the same side of his body as Zephyr does, as in his shoulder guard and most of the armor and fabric on his arms is on his left side. His right side, our left if you're looking at him, which is the same as Zephyr. It makes sense in terms of him being right-handed, of course, but also it just... Actually, is he right-handed? Do we ever see him right? He doesn't write. Is he right-handed? I've never thought about that before. I feel like the right is his dominant side, but I'm not 100% sure. So he fortifies the right side of his body. It's reflective of how Zephyr also fortifies the right side of his body. Anyway, other things in terms of his design. His eyes are very bright and pretty. Which is kind of surprising, but they're nice. And he has some of the funniest expressions in the art book. I love him. It feels so characteristic for him because his personality is just wonderful. On the surface level, he is kind of a comedic relief. You can tell from the demo, it shows his funnier moments. He seems really goofy. He has kind of himbo energy. You know, he straps rocks to his arms. What do you expect? But it's really interesting the amount of depth he has to his character as well. He's actually surprisingly wise and emotionally intelligent in the right moments, but sometimes he's also very awkward and doesn't really know how to read people. He's also just bad with words, which I think is really interesting and reflective of how he finds it difficult to face complex concepts and to try and make sense of them. And he has to try and face that throughout the game as things get more and more complex. But I really like that as a character trait for him. I think it works really well, especially with the way his character arc grows throughout the game, especially again with him being a comedic relief. Because I encountered him first through the demo, I thought he was mostly just going to be funny, but he begins in a way that's completely subverting that expectation because of how closed off he is at the beginning and how angsty he is, how he has so much pain of rejection and grief from his past regrets already, and then even more pain and grief after Zephyr dies, and after he gets his vengeance but still doesn't feel fulfilled afterwards, has no more purpose, and then has to try and find a reason to keep fighting. He does mirror Alphen in that sense, in that they both share Zephyr as their lodestar, which again is reflected in his outfit with the fact that he fortifies the same side as Zephyr. It feels so much more natural, of course, for Law, being that he, throughout the game, lives by Zephyr's words, where Alphen is finding his own path forward with the foundation of his learning being from Zephyr. Law is every choice he makes, he is pushed onward by what Zephyr said in the execution square. I go into this in far more detail in my analysis for Rinwell Law that will come out at some point this year. I have written it. I need to do a second draft of it, but I will go into it, I promise. But I really love the way his character arc goes, with him trying to find that new purpose and facing difficult concepts, realizing what matters most to him, what he's fighting for, how he wants to protect the things and the people that he cares most about. It just feels really natural for him, especially with the way that his arc continues through his actions over the course of the game. Again, not going to go into too much detail about it here, but I freaking love it, man. The one thing I can say about it is actually a note that I have about his anger at Alphen in Dohalim, after Alphen is at his darkest moment thinking about his regrets from the past. I think half of the reason Law is so upset with Alphen is because of his own regrets and how he keeps going over his dad's last words in his head. Zephyr's words had a lot to do with protecting what you care about, hold on to that and never let go, and about regretting that the people he wanted to protect were payment. Law really takes these words to heart, and he knows Alphen admires Zephyr too, so to see Alphen forgetting that sentiment and getting lost in his own regrets must be so frustrating for him in that moment. Later on, he does mention that what he'd been thinking at the moment is, when's this guy gonna get his act together? But I think it is because of that frustration that he feels that he is so upset at the time. But yeah, I think Law's character development throughout the game is just phenomenal. I love him so much. Anyway, enough about his character. Law fight. Law fight good. Combat. Law is actually really fun to play as well. He's really fast, which is the type of gameplay that I enjoy in action JRPGs. I love fast characters, and his arts feel very impactful. I love being able to chain really fast attacks together to like try and hit really high combos, and it's easy with Law, especially with him going into overlimit literally all the time towards the end of the game. The amount of mystic arts, he has so many mystic arts triggered in my games, so much. Like the others barely ever use them, he's always using them. But he's really fun to play as well. You can really let loose. I love that he has different types of arts as well. Like, he has obviously a lot of offensive arts, which makes sense, but he also has spirit skills and awakening status, which is interesting. So like the awakening status intrigues me so much. Like, how does that work? Is it just him getting like focused in his mind, or is that like a literal thing that's happening with astral energy? I think it's probably meant to be more like indicative of how his focus is really strong in that moment, and it lets his attacks be even better, and a bit like when they talk about athletes being in the zone kind of thing. It's like that. But him having spirit skills, specifically steel and inspiration, that intrigues me a lot. Steel obviously being the one he already comes with when you first get him into the party that really pops him up to fight. It increases his attack stat. It makes sense for him. I guess you could say that it's just him like focusing his energy more and really like getting his determination together. Inspiration though, inspiration has plagued my mind since I got it in my first playthrough, because it's a healing art. Law has a healing art. What? It's obviously tied to the narrative really well, because you only get it from the title he gets from stopping Rinwell in Niaz. So it's really tied to the narrative there. I don't remember the name of the title. Intervener, that's it. Law's Intervener title that you get from stopping Rinwell in Niaz is the one that gives him inspiration. And that just means a lot, because in that moment he really learns his limits, I guess. Like, he pushes himself to the absolute limit in that he takes a blow meant to kill someone, and yet he still stands and tries to talk and things. I go into this in my analysis. I'm gonna not go into it right now, but this is really interesting to me, because obviously inspiration takes inspiration from that moment, because it is like a second wind sort of getting your health back and keeping on fighting even though you're on the brink of death, which makes narrative sense. I'm just intrigued by how it works because it does use CP. So like, is it an astral art? Is it not an astral art? Is it just supposed to represent a second wind, or is it supposed to be something more than that? I think it's interesting that you can make your own conclusion on that. I'm just so intrigued by it. Anyway, I've talked too much about that. I actually keep forgetting to talk about the special skills that each of the characters have as well. I didn't talk about it with rinwell. Well, no, I did talk about it with rinwell. I didn't talk about it with shionne. I feel like I didn't use Law's guard breaking as much as I could have. You can carve through armor, but I feel like there weren't that many armored enemies. I mean, there were a few. I don't know. I feel like there were a lot more wolves and stuff, but maybe that's just me thinking about where I grinded. I don't know. I feel like I didn't use it as much as I could have, but it was cool when I did use it, and it has some good use. I don't know. I really like fighting as Law, and I love his character and everything. He's great. But you know who else is great? Kisara. I like Kisara a lot. Her design is interesting. She has a lioness motif, which I feel like is fairly clear for her outfit. Especially, she has a belt, has like a kind of tail on it with a little poofy thing at the bottom that looks like it could be on a tail, like it's fur. Her hair is kind of like a lion's mane, especially with it being kind of blonde. Yeah, it's really nice actually. I like her design a lot. I love the kind of contrast that she has between having a fairly feminine figure but also being the tank of the group. So she has this like heavy armor and everything. She has a mace and a shield. She's clearly very strong, but she chose to modify that to show a little bit of her, I don't know, her internal personality and everything, how she can be kind of teasing at times and kind of fun. And it's not something that she shows that much because she has this serious exterior, but she also has this hidden other side to her. It's great. It's such a fun contrast. Obviously, the fact that she's got her back exposed, it's mentioned in the game that it's a character trait for her. It's something that she chose specifically to show her resolve, not to show her back to the enemy, you know. Makes sense in that respect. Yeah, no, I really like her design. I think that she's got a very pretty design with the white and gold. Kind of interesting in that it reflects the Renin amount of white and gold, but I think that's maybe because it's the armor that is modified. I'm not 100% sure. It's the guardsman armor, kind of. Yeah, you know, she was protecting a Renin. What do you expect? I don't know, she's really pretty. I don't know what else to say. I've not got that many detailed notes on her design. I like it a lot. I guess my only other note is the fact that in the art book she has a little doodle on her like outfit page that is of her carrying Law and rinwell like they're like cubs, which is very cute. Kisara's personality, I've spoken about it a little bit. She's very mature, very level-headed, very grounded, but she does have this optimistic outlook. She's a little bit of a dreamer, but she is also grounded at the same time. It does link into her character development, of course. I'll get to that in a moment. But I love that she's kind of got this strong exterior and internal vulnerability. Like, she has these internal struggles, but she keeps them mostly to herself because she doesn't really want to trouble anyone else with them. She wants to be in touch with her femininity, but does find it quite difficult. She has a kooky side with the fact that she is obsessed with fishing, even the fact that she is kind of obsessed with her brother, which is a little weird, but you know, we'll let it slide this time. The fact that she loves cooking and cleaning so much just to keep herself busy, but like also because she likes taking care of others, which is clearly something that is ingrained in her character, considering that she used to take care of orphans before Menancia was liberated. Well, not liberated, but before dohalim became lord in Menancia. She cares for protecting other people, and that's why she becomes a guardsman and uses a shield, because she wants to protect others. It makes so much sense. I really love that aspect for her personality. I think because of the way that she is and because of how much she cares for other people, she does kind of get overshadowed at times, which makes sense narratively speaking, in that she has so much compassion for other people that she neglects herself sometimes. Like, she's always looking after others, but she needs to look after herself more too. I think because of that, her personality and her development is also a lot subtler, and her character arc feels subtler for that. It's a lot to do with changing her own internal beliefs and facing the reality of how the world is, rather than being blindly optimistic and seeing a utopia that doesn't necessarily exist, just not noticing all of the pain and suffering that still exist beneath that. Her character arc has a lot to do with no longer blinding herself or being ignorantly optimistic. She needs to work hard to achieve true equality between Danins and Renins, and to make sure that people don't have to suffer anymore. I think because she cares so much about other people, she wants to believe that other people are living happily, but she also wants to work for that when she realizes the truth, you know? I think because of her compassionate side as well, it makes sense that family bonds are so important to her. They are something that pushes her forward throughout the game. Obviously with Miguel at the beginning, but then as she grows closer to the party, it's something that becomes a lot more important to her with them. She wants to find a world where they can all be happy as well. But because her character arc is so dedicated towards other people, it's so it kind of overshadows herself in a way, but it's a part of her too, so I guess that also makes sense. She just cares a lot about other people. But no, I love Kisara. I think that she's so nice and so caring for others and so mature, but she does have this teasing side as well. I don't know, I feel like her stuff was a lot subtler, and because she gets overshadowed, I feel like I've not thought about her as deeply as I want to. So I don't know, maybe I'll try and pay more attention to her next time I go through the game. Yeah, she does have more depth to her character arc that I'm giving her credit for here. Yeah, I think the main point of it is her compassion towards other people though, so that makes sense. Yeah, I didn't really have many notes for her as I played through the game. The one note that I did have was, you are not immune to Hot Lady Night, because of course it was. But I've been looking into her a little bit more recently. I'm looking forward to going even deeper with thinking about Kisara. But before I even do that, we need to talk about her combat. I also need to go more deeply into her combat, to be honest, because I have not played as her that much. Part of that might be because she's slow as a character, and I'm not the most fond of slow characters. I say as one of my favourite characters to play as in Vesperia was the slow tank, but here we are. She's slow, but she's also a tank. She has some really interesting arts. She has some sort of a guard ignition thing where she gets like a stronger morale if she guards perfectly. I don't feel like I used it much because I never play as her. I need to play as her more, basically. But she does have some nice combos, and I did find it a bit difficult to adapt to guarding instead of dodging. But like, I think if you got the hang of her, she could be really versatile as a character. I just need to actually play as her a little bit more. But the solo battle that I did against Legale in that one side quest, that was fun. I liked that. Yeah, no, I enjoyed her combat, but I haven't really gone into it as much as I want to, so I'll get there eventually. But yeah, Kisara, she's great. I love her. Now, Dohalim Ilkaris, the most recent best boy of the Tales of personality poll. I like Dohalim, he's cool. His design is really interesting actually. In an interview I read recently, apparently his motif, his animal motif, is that of a one-winged bird. Not just a bird, a one-winged bird, which is emphasised by the fact that he has a cloak that only goes over one shoulder, which kind of looks like feathers with the way the strips of fabric go down his back as well. But yeah, he has a one-winged bird motif, which apparently links into the idea of him having sort of liberation that birds represent, but also the fact that he is kind of chained down because he only has one wing, so he can't fly, linking into his personality and his character arc and all of the regrets that he has. Apparently his outfit is built on the idea of like pyramids and stone. Pyramids, of course, is certainly a part of a historical aspect as well. I feel like his clothes do feel fairly old, especially in comparison to some of the other lords, which naturally links into his love of artifacts and curios, etc, etc. He is kind of shaped like a Dorito. He has broad shoulders and a slim waist. I don't know why I make a note of that, but I made a note of it, I guess. Apparently the rings that he wears were gifts. They're a show of wealth, clearly, but he doesn't wear one on his wedding finger. His ring finger on the left hand, which is interesting. It's like every other finger, just not that one. I don't know if maybe that's to show like a consideration for the traditional values of romance or whatever, or perhaps to reflect that he does care about that sort of thing because later on he becomes an officiant. Of course, he wears an eagle on the front of his clothes, which I think is supposed to be like a symbol of Elder Menancia. He's the Lord, what do you expect? But also like to tie into the bird motif as well of his clothing. So you know how earlier I mentioned that Alphen's animal motif was the only one to be a mythological creature? Well, it turns out I was wrong. I've actually looked into it a little bit further since initially recording this review, and it turns out that Dohalim's animal motif of a one-winged bird is also a Chinese mythological creature that I had not heard of before. It's also known as the shionne bird. Sorry for pronouncing that wrong. It's a bird with only one eye and one wing, which is often depicted in a pair with another bird. On its own, it's unable to fly and its sense of sight is very limited. However, when it is together with another of the same bird, they can together achieve flight and deep vision. I think this is really interesting in comparison to Dohalim, especially when you take into account his character arc and the things that he is most concerned with during his story. He is defined by being odd for a Renin, the only Renin Lord to ever consider trying to have some sort of coexistence between Danans and Renins that we know of. He goes completely against all of the status quo of what it means to be Renin as far as Renins are concerned. And because his concerns are so deeply based upon coexistence between Danans and Renins, it's easy to see how this could compare to a bird which depends on another bird for its own survival. The shionne bird is used to represent companionship, dependence, and teamwork and love. When two of the birds are paired, they're intimately connected and rely perfectly on the other for survival. If one bird is without the other, it would not survive, but together they are able to flourish. I think this is really interesting to look at because it does say quite a lot about Dohalim's idea of coexistence. I think it also says a lot about Dohalim himself, especially since he can be short-sighted on his own, not just in terms of his actions in Menancia and the fact that he blinded himself to reality, but also just his general lack of common sense and tendency not to think so much about the consequences of his actions when he first says things. If he were left alone, he would probably sink into the depths of his despair much more easily. He's that sort of person that without someone there to ground him, he will either float off into the clouds or sink down beneath the rocks. But with Kisara there to balance him out, then he manages to soar. And I think that really says a lot about him as a person. So the shionne bird is actually a perfect symbol for Dohalim himself as a character, at least in my opinion. Yeah, I really like his design. I think he looks cool. He's got like a little heart in his fringe, so that's cute. He has earrings, they're fun. Yeah, he looks cool. I like him. What I like even more, of course, is his personality, because Dohalim's great. He comes off as being very regal when you first meet him, but of course it's just a mask that he's wearing to cloak all of the self-loathing that he feels within and all of his internal conflicts that he then has to face. He seems very subdued and internal, especially as you go through the course of the game, but he is also an eccentric. He's very funny. He comes out with poetry as you're just standing around doing nothing. He has a teasing side, especially when it comes to law, I feel. He has no common sense, and yet he spouts all of this poetry that's like beautiful words that mean nothing. They're not all that deep. So the contrast between him and law really interests me. But of course he's also got his appreciation of the arts and of history. I feel like that's a really interesting character trait for him, especially considering his position as a lord and how he develops over the course of the game. He has such a reverence for the history of the world and all the artifacts that are left behind that it is so interesting that he then, you know, continues to learn more about Dana as he progresses through the story. Actually, I really love how history is implemented within his character arc, because his character arc is mainly about his struggle with conflict avoidance for his own personal comfort, but also needing to come to terms with confronting that conflict so he can be a good leader for other people. But I feel like also a lot of his character arc is to do with the past and about history and about how everything he thought he knew about Lenegis and Rena is wrong, and actually he needs to relearn so much of that, and how he also learns more about Dana and he's changing his beliefs the same way that Rinwell is really throughout the course of the game, because he's grown up with all of these Renin beliefs about how Danans are. It's so fascinating to me. Of course, another big aspect of his character arc is the fact that he is invested in atonement for the past. At the beginning, it is a sort of self-sacrificing atonement. He offers his life to Faria on Lenegis for her own revenge, like it doesn't matter to him. But as it goes on past that point, he begins to have things that he knows he needs to change, and he has the power to change. So he needs to keep living so he can do these things. He doesn't want to die specifically, but he feels that other people have more right to his life than he does, at least until he begins to develop more and to feel that he can do something with his life, even despite his past regrets. Just there's a lot of nuance in there. I'm really looking forward to looking more deeply into his character at some point, because I meant to do that last year and I never did. But no, I think he's fascinating as a character. He's so interesting. I also had a note. Alright, so please keep in mind that this note is from before we knew the truth about everything that was happening in Menancia. But I have a note here. I'm curious as to whether Dohalim will be used as a conduit to explore how Renins might begin to pay reparations for everything their people have done over the past 3 centuries. One person cannot be held accountable for their ancestors' actions, but if they continue to perpetuate the same behaviours when they have the power and means to make change, aren't they just as accountable? Inaction can say as much about a person as action, though I think it is intention which gives nuance to action. I think that this is quite quite an interesting concept, to be honest. Dohalim, he's not representative of all Renans, but he does become a leader for them and tries to help them to develop the same way that he did, in that they're beginning to see more nuance between Danans and Renans and not just seeing black and white. It is sort of his way of atoning because he is actively working, using his power and status not as a thing that weights him down, but as something that gives him the opportunity to help other people to live more freely and helping people to develop more and to come to a better understanding of the world and of coexistence, a true coexistence rather than the false coexistence that he instated in Menancia for his own personal comfort. There's such an interesting nuance with the reasons for his doing things and everything. He's so cool. He's so interesting as a character. I think Dohalim's fascinating. I'm really looking forward to looking into him more, and I can see why he was crowned best boy. As for Dohalim's combat, somehow I've managed to forget it twice in making this video, so I think perhaps it's left less of an impression on me than I had expected. I did make notes on it after remembering eventually. Surprisingly, I actually do enjoy playing as Dohalim. I think he's interesting. He twirls and spins a lot, which I think is fun. I like his quarterstaff. It's very cool. I'm not the best at doing perfect evasion, so I didn't really use his staff extension very much, but it does seem really cool, especially if you can use it really well to your advantage. I'm just not very good at dodging properly. I do like his arts though. Penumbra is a fantastic art. It really helps you get over towards where the enemy is. It's one of those moves that I kind of relied on a lot once I realised what it did. To be honest, actually, with Dohalim, he is the character in terms of combat that really made me start paying attention to what specifically arts do when you're using them in terms of like movement and things, whether they knock enemies up into the air or throw them down to the ground. It's Dohalim who really made me start thinking about that when I was doing his highest level training grounds, the ultimate. He's the one that made me start thinking a lot about that, and I think that makes sense given his playstyle for me, because of how my tendency tends to be towards other faster characters or characters who stay out of the way more. Dohalim was a little bit of a challenge for me in terms of fighting as him, but I found him quite fun in the end. You have to really think about how to use him properly. I do like his astral arts. I feel like I didn't use him all that much, to be honest. I feel like I used him more as a melee fighter, but he does have some good astral arts, and of course he's also a healer, surprisingly. Yes, he is a healer. And I think his healing moves were good as well. It makes sense though that he is secondary to Shionne in terms of being a healer, because that is also plot relevant, with Shionne being a fantastic healer that they all comment on. But it also says a lot about Dohalim for him to have healing arts too. You know, he's clearly a caring person as well. Still, I really feel like I've not gotten the hang of Dohalim yet. I need to work a little bit more on using him, perhaps in another playthrough of the game. While we're here, we might as well talk a little bit about some of the side characters. I specifically have a note for Zephyr here because Zephyr is so immensely important to the story, because he is not only a character who's with them at the beginning of the game, but he's also a lodestar for Alphen and Law specifically as the game continues on. But also, like, he has this mentor role that really continues on even past his death, which is so intriguing to me. It's actually cemented at the very beginning of the game what his role is there, because at the very beginning, when there is the prologue narrative where the world is explained to us, it's Zephyr who gives that explanation. It's his voice which speaks to us there, which really cements his role as a mentor, as a lodestar, and the things that he talks about really makes it clear that it is Zephyr the character, not just his voice actor. He only ever actually talks in detail in that segment about Calaglia. He doesn't talk about any of the other realms past the fact that there are 5 realms and that this is how things are now with the crown contest. He can't get past the gates of fire. No one can get past the gates of fire. A couple people probably have before, specifically Law has, but as far as we know, Zephyr hasn't gone past them at all. It makes sense then that he wouldn't know that much about the other realms. He doesn't know anything about Sislodia when they go into Sislodia, so it's fairly certain that he doesn't really know anything about them. Hence why his narration hinges heavily on Calaglia specifically, and introduces us to that realm. Basically, he's teaching us about the world at the same time that Alphen learns about the world, so it cements his role as a mentor figure, as someone who gives advice and basically gives the characters things that they will continue to think about for the rest of the game. Things about how Alphen needs to think about his reason for fighting and about what it means to be a slave. Shionne needs to think about her attitude towards Danans and how she needs to accept the fact that it's her people who have done this rather than like distancing herself from it, if that makes any sense. moments, speaking to Rinwell, of course, and saying about how 3 centuries of slavery and suffering is too much to lay at a single person's feet, really prompting Rinwell to think about the way that she believes people are at that point in the game and to develop herself. And of course, his speech in the execution square being the guiding light for Law throughout the rest of the game. He doesn't specifically have any relation to dohalim or kisara because they never met him, which I feel is kind of a shame, but they didn't really need guidance the same way as the younger characters did, because they already have their beliefs about the world and about what they want. They both want coexistence. They just need to look at reality and to change things from there. And it's really Alphen and the others who help them get past that as well by talking with them. But Zephyr's role in the story is huge. It's huge. And as I said before, I really love the resolution we got with him through the Phantom encounters at the very end, with him being the final mega boss that Law wanted to fight against in the execution square, with Law's battle theme Obstinate Loneliness playing. I'm sorry, I adore that piece of music. I'm coming back to the OST in a moment, but dear God, I love that. Yeah, I think Zephyr's fantastic. I love him. Another side character who's quite important is Nayori. She feels more like a plot device than a character, if that makes any sense. She was there to introduce Alphen's past and to create intrigue for it, and also to kind of give them the knowledge that they needed to then go on and face off against the astral spirit at the very end. Of course, the outfits as well. It was kind of her will that really sparked everything off by sending Alphen back down to Dana. But because of all that, she feels like a plot device, you know? She's a symbol. She's not an actual person. She is a symbol and a lodestar in a sense, but she is not that much of a character. I think that's okay because she serves her purpose. She's not meant to be someone that we care that much about. We can see why Alphen kind of cares about her, but it's not like he knew her that well. I'm interested in if they would ever develop her any further, but I don't think it's the end of the world that she wasn't developed anymore. I think that the role she served in the story worked as a plot device, which she basically is, so it makes sense. The resistance leaders and other members of resistance groups, I think that they were all really interesting characters as well. I liked the Crimson Crows. I think Tilsa's my favourite out of them, but I do really like the quirks that they gave each of the characters, with Nath constantly complaining about how difficult things are, but like really needing to get loads of work done all the time, and then, you know, Grenar being fairly happy-go-lucky and chill and stuff, and then, you know, Tilsa being a medic, but also interested in kind of mental health stuff later on. That's interesting to me. The Silver Swords were really interesting, especially with the whole medic thing. I like Bregan. He's a cool character. I kind of forgot his name several times, so I don't think he left that much of an impression on me, but like, he's cool. The Gold Dust Cats, of course, are great. Lagiel and Miguel, of course, being the two main ones that got development there. Miguel not being around for that long, of course. I would have liked to know more about Miguel and to see him more. I feel like a lot of his role in the story was just to be ominous about really being like, there is something more that I must show you, but no, I'm spoiling myself. I can't tell you anymore. Not yet. Not until we get to the depths of the mine or whatever. What was it? A quarry, that's the word. But I did like Miguel. I thought he was interesting. I would have loved to know more, but also I feel like Kisara talking about him at camp and things kind of serves that as well, because of course she's going to talk about her brother, because she's still grieving him throughout the game, but trying to come to terms with his death and the fact that they never really got to make things up between them, a bit like with Law and Zephyr. Yeah, no, I like that. I think Miguel's kind of cool. The one note I have made is that I recognized his Japanese seiyuu immediately because I've heard him in other things before, and I could not unhear him as a certain character from a certain anime. So that was fun. The Darkwings were interesting. They were really interesting, actually. I hated Deadeye. Like, I started off thinking like, oh, okay, another resistance leader. Hello, Deadeye. And then he started being awful, and I was like, oh, wow, you're awful. Wow. You're really like that, huh? But I like that we got a little bit of exploration into his depth as the story went on, trying to kind of portray how he may have started off with good intentions, but as time went on, they become distorted. He's clearly there for narrative purposes as a contrast to like Almadria and Rinwell in terms of hatred and vengeance and everything. I go into this more in the analysis that I have written, that I have not yet put up, that I will eventually upload. I'm sorry. I keep talking about it. I do go into it more in depth. It'll come out eventually, I'm sorry. But yeah, he was interesting. I didn't like him very much. Bayfon was interesting as well, actually. He talked a lot about Deadheim, which I guess makes sense because, you know, they were friends at one point. But it's interesting to see his perspective as someone who has seen Deadheim's decline and who probably feels a bit wistful for the old days when they could be friends and stuff. Yeah, I don't know, I liked them. And there wasn't a resistance in Garotharos because of plot, so that makes sense. But no, I enjoyed the resistance leaders. I thought they were all interesting. I thought Dohalim's friends were interesting as well, Faria and Avakir. I would have liked to see more of them. I think each of the side characters really helped to develop the main party, if that makes any sense. And that's kind of what they're meant to do, so it works well. So now that we've talked about the side characters, let's talk about the villains, because they're interesting. So, Balsif, the first boss. Do you remember him? I kind of forgot him. He's the first boss, so looking back, he's probably the least interesting of all of the lords, but I think that kind of makes sense given that he's the very first boss that you fight, so you don't really want to make him the most interesting because you want it to kind of increase in hype as you learn more about all the different lords. I think it's a little bit of a shame. I kind of would have liked to know more about Balsif. I think the insight we got into him with the little scene between him and Ganabel talking over that communication device that they had was interesting because it gave us the information that he's been in the Crown Contest twice and he's still not won, so that's fun. But this time around he dies, so that's not much better, is it? I guess you learn about him from like his castle Ganymede and also the way that he treats the slaves, much like every other lord. You know, you're gonna learn about them from the way that they run the realm and the way that the realm looks. But aside from that, the only thing we know about him is that he was quite dedicated to his family, which we learned on Lenegus. I did like getting that extra information. I still would have liked to know more about him, but I feel like he doesn't need to be the most complicated because of his status as the first boss. You know, he doesn't need to be the most intriguing, but he's interesting as it is. I also like his design. He's cool. Ganabel, I really liked Ganabel as a character. I thought he was really interesting. Having that kind of deception and subterfuge as part of his mystique. Getting to know him as Menek and then realizing that he's actually Ganabel the entire time, that's fascinating. It was such a twist, it threw me off the first time. But he's really fascinating as a character because of that. I wonder if it was like bending light energy to create an illusion. I'm guessing. That would probably make sense. I kind of wish that was played into more with like illusions and things. I would have liked to see more of that. Anyway, I thought that Ganabel was really interesting. To be honest, I'll probably mention it again later on, but Cyslodia was probably my favorite of the realms, if that makes any sense. Like, I liked all of the realms going to them and everything, but Cyslodia I really like it, man. Especially with the music, but the design is also really cool. But I thought the story there was fascinating. Yeah, no, I really liked Cyslodia. I did want more from him. I wanted to know more about him because I don't know, like the way he talks and things, I feel like he should know more than he seems to because of the way that he is. But I think he works really well with Cyslodia as a realm. It makes sense that things are the way they are because he's leading the realm. Yeah, no, I think he was fascinating as a character. I would have loved to know more. Apparently what he did because of caring about the progression of the Renans and everything and wanting to evolve and take over Dana. So I don't think he ever would have been able to do that if he had been a sovereign because of what happens to all the sovereigns. But, you know, it's interesting to know a little bit more about him. I would have liked to know even more, but here we are. I think he's interesting as a character though. Now obviously the Lord of Menancia is Dohalim, who we've already talked about in depth. The villain of that arc is Kelzelik, who is, well, he was fairly obvious. Like, he did not hide the fact that he was suspicious with the way he was voiced and the way he acted and everything. Like, it was obvious that he was going to be the antagonist. Kelzelik was really obvious as a villain, which I think makes sense. You don't really need to, like, he had the subterfuge arc in Cyslodia. He doesn't really need to be subtle at all. I thought it was interesting that he is clearly powerless on his own. He has to use a Zoogle given to him by Almadria in order to even face off against the party. He's clearly subservient to Almadria the entire time because he was on her ship. I thought the resolution we got with him was really interesting in the Beyond the Grave side quest. It really showed the complexity of guilt and regret for what you've done after you realize that you've killed lots of people. It was an interesting fate for him. I did enjoy that they went into that a bit more. He didn't just disappear. Yeah, I thought it was okay. He was not the best, not the worst. He existed. Almadria, however, Almadria fascinates me, and I wish we knew more about her because my goodness, I have so many questions. I go into her a little bit more in detail in my analysis that I keep talking about that I'll eventually put up, but I think her design is really interesting. It's got so much more depth than I ever expected. Her character is interesting. She's so ambitious that she stops caring about other people. Did she even care about them to begin with? I'm not sure. She's just fascinating to me. I'm most fascinated though by her experiments and the knowledge that she took from Rinwell's clan when she killed them. That stuff just fascinates me. I think she was making gigantic zoogles, but I want to know more. I want to know more about the uses for Esteluva, about all the zoogles that she was designing and keeping. Oh man, I just have so many questions about Almeida. But I think that she served really well as the villain for that arc. She's easy to hate, which makes sense because we need to understand why Rinwell hates her so much. Yeah, I don't know, she works really well for the arc that she's in. I'm fascinated by her. And then we get to Voron. Voron is interesting in that I feel like he is the embodiment of wasted potential. Like, as in, I was interested by him, but I was also disappointed by him even as I was playing the game, because I feel like we didn't get to see the most we could have gotten out of him. And by a certain point, I stopped taking him seriously, which might be my own undoing, I suppose. He's really interesting. I think it's fascinating how he has this sort of... He doesn't care about anything. He's apathetic because he believes everything is his to own. But then he starts caring about killing Alphen. He specifically has emotions about that. He is so consumed by that anger and the feeling that it is going against his right to own everything, you know? He is fascinating as a character. I just wish there was more to him. I would have liked to know more about his past, about how he became a test subject. Actually, the interesting thing about him being a test subject is I did guess it in my notes that I kept to myself. Yeah, here's the note that I had on Voron for after I finished episode 37, so just after the sky opened up, essentially. I'm kind of disappointed by Voron. He was so hyped up that I thought he would have had more development when we actually fought against him. Part of me actually hopes he will come back just so we get more of that development. I mean, he did come back, so luckily that happened. But here's the interesting part of the note. My current theory is that Voron was also a test subject like Alphen, but maybe they used a Renin instead of a Danin at that time. Maybe he's the reason they had to use Alphen because the power wasn't compatible with a Renin, or maybe not. Either that or they were just testing out the Sovereign's power at that point. They weren't an established thing yet, so they used Danins as test subjects for the power so they would know that the power wouldn't be too much for a human, then they could give it to a Renin maybe? That was my theory at the time. I was correct about it being a test subject. I didn't expect him to be Danin as well apparently, but I don't feel like it was that much of a surprise when he did turn out to be a Danin as well, after he was a test subject. Especially because at that point they'd already established, I think, that the test subject sovereigns had to be Danin for it to even work because they had to have the light energy, whereas the maiden had to have the dark astral energy, you know, because the balance and everything. It makes sense, narratively speaking. But yeah, no, I guessed that he would be a test subject, so that was interesting. I also did at one point earlier on, when I forgot what his name was, have another note about him. Oh yeah, I had a note. Also, is the Waterlord the only one we haven't seen at all? Not in the opening or anything. It's obviously Almeida on the ship in the opening, so I'm curious about who the Waterlord could be. I don't think it's Crowman, but Crowman being Voron, of course. So hilariously, it was. He was even in the section with all of the lords in it in the opening. He is the Waterlord. It just makes sense. But in hindsight, it's a lot more obvious than it was as I was playing through the game the first time. But yeah, Voron was interesting. I feel like his potential was wasted, but I have questions. They might never get answered. While I'm on this though, here's just a more of a side note that I think there's special owls in Tales of Arise. I forgot to mention the owls before. I enjoyed the owl hunting side quest. I thought it was fun. The special owls though. There are 6 special owls at the end of the game that you find. There's 1 in each realm, but there's 2 in Calaglia. Each of them represents a dead person. No, but honestly, they do. Because in Calaglia, you find the orange one, which is Zephyr. It has like a little marking where Zephyr's scar is and everything. You find Balsif, color is all the same and everything, reds and black and gold. In Cyslodia, you find a monochrome black and white one that is in the palace there to represent Ganabel, looking like his outfit there. In Menancia, you find one in the guards chambers that has glasses. That's Miguel. Because they couldn't have him for dohalim because he's not dead. Ganath Haros on the island, because the ship is gone, but that's where the ship got wrecked, is the one that represents Almeida. because of like the coloration, and also the sounds that they all make are, I think it's the voice actors, like the same ones that are doing them. I'm not 100% sure though. But the way that she like voices that one as well is very Almedria. And the last one you find is in the Pelagian castle, Delpharis castle, and it is deep blue and is meant to represent Voron, who was not technically dead at the time, but he could be. But like, my general thing is they all represent dead people. Basically, which I find really funny. And they do genuinely represent them, because the art book that I have has their names beside each of the owls on one of the pages, so it is actually a thing that's intentional. I just find that interesting and neat, and I never noticed it the first time. Anyway, back to the actual characters. The Helganquil, they were kind of out of left field, but then they were also foreshadowed really well with the Red Women. When you go back and look at it, I think the Red Women show up with all of the lords except for Ganabel, I want to say. I don't remember if there was a Red Woman anywhere in Ceclonia, but they were everywhere else, certainly, which I think is really fun. It makes sense that there is another race other than humans, the Helganquil being that race. I kind of wish we knew more about them, what their capabilities were, whether it's like technology or like a biological thing that allows them to kind of cloak themselves to look like the Red Women. Can they cloak themselves as other people as well? Or do they just possess others? I don't know. It's really interesting though. But it's also interesting that they are the only ones who can get brainwashed specifically by the Renin astral spirit. That's fascinating to me. I also have so many questions about the Fruit of Helgen. Clearly it's got a link to the Helganquil because of the word Helgen, which apparently means Renin in the ancient language, so that's fun. But no, I've got questions about like how it was discovered, how it works. Is it like to do with the amount of astral energy in your body, or is it to do with metabolism, or what? Like, it's fascinating to me, but we'll never get the answers. Sadly. But it's really interesting. Yeah, I wish we knew more about the Helganquil, but also at the same time I can see why they didn't. And then the final villain of the game, Red's Great Astral Spirit. I made a note. It was fairly soon after the midpoint of the game. Yeah, it was very soon after the midpoint of the game. I made the note. I can't believe I almost fell for the game's trickery. Of course, the game can't end before we kill God itself. So then we fought God itself. Which I find kind of hilarious. It makes sense, narratively speaking. It's fitting for the game's themes, especially with the way that it ends not in the astral spirit dying, but in being saved by uniting together with the Danon astral will. You know, dark and light astral energy coming together in a balance. It's been foreshadowed throughout the entire game, basically. Yeah, I think it works as a plot thing. And it is technically a character in its own right, especially with getting to know how it feels, not only through Shionne's thorns and their need to preserve themselves. Oh, and also like the idea of consumption and everything through Shionne, the thorns consuming her, but also Shionne being a big eater, which maybe even leans into that, who knows? Like, always being hungry. Oh man, that's something I read recently. From someone else. I can't take credit for it, but it's fun. I really enjoyed Rena's Spirit. Thought it was interesting. I liked it as a final boss. I felt like the boss fight was a bit easy though, but maybe that was just I was overpowered at the time. I don't know. I did like that final fight with Voron as well. That was really fun, very hype. But no, I liked Rena's Spirit as a final boss. Like, even though it was a god, it tied to the story really well, as opposed to just being like a, oh well, we've got to throw God in here, sure, let's do it because it's a JRPG. You know, it felt natural for it to be that huge of a thing they're fighting against. Yeah, so essentially, I love the characters in this game. I think that they're all really intriguing and interesting and bring the story to life. And what brings them even more to life is the dialogue and the skits in the game, because it's just fantastic. All of the extra dialogue you can get as you run around and as you fight and as you camp, it all made it feel like the world was really alive as you go around. I've played the game twice now, and I'm still finding things that are new. I'm still finding them. I spent hours just sleeping at camp to get all of the extra lines for if you don't talk to any of your friends at the end of camp, because there are extra lines for that. It's really fun. There's some really good ones in there. Also, as you run around in the post-battle things, you know, depending on who's in your party, get different lines in battle. There's just so much, and it really brings the characters to life. I adore it. You know, it really makes it feel alive, and like they're all like chatting, and you're watching them grow closer together as friends and have all this banter and everything. It's really good. And it really shows the emphasis that the game places on developing the bonds between the characters, which are developed even more through skits, because skits give us so much character development. I wanted more skits, which is not something that I thought I would say after playing Tales of Berseria, because in Tales of Berseria there were too many skits. There is a balance, but I really wanted more of the characters, and the skits in Tales of Arise were just so good because they gave us so much of the characters and their development, and I adored them. I really liked the ones that you got for cooking different things. The entire pancake side quest was just very good. I love the campfire skits you get for talking to each of the party members that develop each of their individual character arcs. They just have so much depth to them. I like all the ones you get for completing the training grounds even. Like, it felt like everything that you did was rewarded. The skits were incentive to try and do as much as you could during the game. That's probably why I was so eager to try and do as much of it as possible during my first playthrough. And it's why I'm still finding new things now, because I just want to know more about these characters. So seeing more skits and seeing more dialogue and everything, all of it brings the world to life so much. I adore it. But yeah, they are all part of what helps to develop the relationships between the characters, which is massively important to the game. It's a huge part of the plot and marketing of the game. Each of the characters were introduced in pairs. They're marketed always in pairs. They place so much emphasis on the bonds between them, and the party dynamics are fantastic as well as they go through the game. Of course, like, the dynamics between every single character is phenomenal, but like, also they place so much emphasis on the specific pairs. Like, not even just in the game, at the outside events as well. Like, okay, I'm going to talk about two events in particular. One of them's the stage play. I've seen the stage play. I saw it in Japanese and I saw it with the English subtitles as well. It's actually really good, but it showed a little bit more backstory and things. Stuff about the Crimson Crows, stuff about Zephyr that was really interesting, and about Lost Past. But each stage play, at the end of the play, actually I think before it they had a pair of characters having a conversation. I'm not 100% sure, but I think they did. And at the end of it, they ended it off with a pair of characters having a conversation each night. I think the two that I saw were both between Rinwell and Law. I think. I don't 100% remember them, but I think they were both between Rinwell and Law. No, the second one was between the whole party, I think. And the first one was definitely between Rinwell and Law, but they were both really great. But yeah, each of them were generally between a different pair. So I think the first story they did was Alphen and Shionne. I didn't see that one. Then the second was Rinwell and Law. I did see that one. And then the third one was Kisara and Dohalim. And then I think the last one was the whole party. At least for the original Japanese run of it. The English dub one, I think they only did one showing. And I think it was the whole party. And it ended kind of with Rinwell and Law, as far as I remember. I'm not 100% sure, but you know, I'm biased. I like Rinwell and Law, so I was happy. But yeah, they focused on the pairs. That's the point I'm trying to make. And they did the same thing at the anniversary event that they did in Japan last year, where they really had a focus on the pairs between them. I think they did different pairs at each showing there as well. They call it like the shadow narration, like it's where they're not on stage but you can hear their voices. I think one of them was definitely Rinwell and Law. Was the other one Alphen and Shionne? Then they had conversations between each pair during the actual event as well. I don't know exactly what happened. I didn't get to see it. I think it was just an in-person event, but I've read a few like people's accounts of what's happened at it, so it was interesting. I don't know, but yeah, they place the emphasis on the pairs, okay? And that's partially because of the theme of love in the game. I'm gonna go over that in an analysis at some point as well, but it's a hugely emphasized theme throughout the game. So naturally, the three pairs that the game markets the most all have a sense of romantic tension. Actually, I was shocked by the fact that they included so much romance. I didn't expect it. Alphen and Shionne, of course, being the main pair, their romance was so heavily featured throughout the game that like I wasn't sure what to make of it at first as I played through, because I didn't expect it. I didn't think they would go through with it, but then they did. But it also felt like a natural progression of chemistry between the two of them, especially, you know, with their characters being the way they are, with them being like two halves. Like Alphen cannot feel pain and Shionne cannot touch anyone, but Alphen can touch Shionne because he can't feel pain, at least until he stops being able to not feel pain, until he starts feeling pain again. And then he still like reaches out to her because he cares that much about her, and it's romantic, it's cute. The past creates tension between the two of them, but they overcome that, and Alphen wants to fight for Shionne at the very end. The fact that the end goal is save all of Dana and also Shionne is highly indicative of what Alphen cares about. The fact that he doesn't want anyone to have to sacrifice themselves, but he doesn't want Shionne specifically to have to sacrifice herself because he cares specifically about her. He'd rather watch the world go into ruin than have her sacrifice herself. Actually, interestingly, it took me a while to realise the real insinuation between what Deadime says when he taunts Alphen in Niaz when you first get there. Basically, like, Deadime is talking about like the relations between Alphen and Shionne, and at the time, like, I thought, oh yeah, no, teasing the romantic tension again. I later realized, oh yeah, he's probably talking about sexual relations, which, whoop. Like, the note I've got here is, I just realized the insinuation from Deadeye was probably, oh, you only keep her around because you're sleeping with her. Which, I can't believe I didn't realize it sooner, because it took me like, well, a couple days to realize that. Yeah, it just makes Deadeye more unlikable. But like, it is also, you know, taunting Alpha's relationship with Shionne and their chemistry and the way that they feel about each other, you know. Also, I have another note about why Alphen stops Shionne outside of the inn in Niaz. I just realised that the reason Alphen stops Shionne outside the inn in Niaz is probably because she's not welcomed in Niaz since she's a Renin. And yeah, she can protect herself, but he doesn't want her to need to. He wants to protect her. Because like, Shionne does a lot of reckless things, right? She doesn't care that much about her life. She would throw it away because she can't die. But Alphen doesn't know that she can't die, and she almost did seemingly die. So he's worried about her and he wants to make sure that nothing's going to happen to her and stuff. And especially in Niaz, which is completely against Renins, he's going to be worried about her. It makes a lot of sense for him to stop her there. It's really interesting. Anyway, yeah, the two of them have a lot of chemistry together and a lot to do with the ideas of sacrifice and the reason why you live, the reason why you fight, especially the reason why you live. You know, because obviously Alphen has a sort of hero complex and Shionne feels she needs to sacrifice herself for the sake of the world. Alphen would take people's pain because he can't feel it. You know, it's all sort of self-sacrificing kind of vibe, I guess. I'm going to go into this more in depth in another analysis video, but you know, just it's a big thing for the two of them, and I think that the way that their stories are tied together makes so much sense. Actually, that's something that's done really well with all three of the pairs, is that each of their individual character arcs come together and act as foils for each other and are developed more by each other throughout the course of the game. It's really interesting, and it's even more relevant with Law and Rinwell, who I adore and I'm biased towards because they're my favourites, but still, I'm not going to go too much in depth about them because I have done a whole analysis video that I will get back to and I will put it up eventually, I promise. Well, I've written it, but you know, we'll get there eventually. Anyway, I'm biased. They subvert my expectations. I don't know if it's just because of the way that they act or because they were both young. I kind of expected them to be like siblings when I first met their characters, but then I got duped. And they have so much chemistry by the end of it, and Law's crush on Rinwell is the cutest freaking thing in the game. And it has a lot of depth to it, and I went into it in my analysis, and I love them a lot. Actually, it's really interesting because you see how they act around each other before Niaz, but then Niaz is the big turning point for the two of them, after which the chemistry between them and the way that they act around each other changes. And it makes a lot of sense because of what happens there and because of their reasons for doing what they do, which I talk about in my analysis. I'm gonna stop saying that, but you know, you know what I mean. So I'm gonna talk about some other stuff that's less plot relevant, I guess. I really love Law and Rinwell. I think they've got great chemistry. I actually feel it's really interesting that even though on the surface, you know, Rinwell is more serious and Law is more silly, I guess, comedic relief, there's also kind of a flip side to it where sometimes Law doesn't feel all that immature. He knows when to stop joking around and to be serious about things. And sometimes Rinwell comes off as a little more childish with the way that she acts and the way that she teases, especially with Law. Especially with Law. He kind of encourages her to be young, you know, rather than growing up quickly. Also the fact that Rinwell gets really easily riled up, especially as the game progresses onward, and the way that Law can be serious sometimes, it's really reflected actually in their fighting styles. Law's martial arts might seem like brute force, but they require a certain amount of precision and control to be effective. He also uses his awakening skills and the like of inspiration as well, which are very centered on kind of the same ideas that martial arts tend to focus on, of like finding your core and focusing your energy in different parts of your body. It's very much being in control of your whole body and being aware of every movement you make. Meanwhile, Rinwell's magic is very powerful and based on a connection with the world around her, but she's still learning to control it because of the fact that she's had to hide it for so long during her upbringing. It ends up being able to go a little chaotic and wild because it is so heavily focused not on control within her own body of her physical being, but of her emotions, of connecting with the feeling of the spell of the astral energy and using that to connect to the astral energy and invoke its power through her incantation, because she has to connect with the vibe of the astral energy and the emotion emotion it conveys. This is also kind of reflected in how she sometimes just loses patience with her incantations and yells blah 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 magic, which is of course an homage to Rita from Tales of Vesperia. This, as well as her magic exam, which is an homage to Magilu from Tales of Berseria, as well as being homages, they are indicative of how she just loses patience and just goes with it. But it works because it doesn't need to be as controlled in a physical sense. It's more an emotional connection. It's emblematic of her free-willed spirit, and the fact that Law is so precise and Rinwell is so chaotic in their fighting styles is such an interesting contrast to how their personalities generally seem to be, since Law is quite chaotic at times and Rinwell tends to be more withdrawn, at least at the start. Seriously, the two of them fascinate me. They're really interesting. I think also just the fact that their stories deal so much with the emotional effects of losing family members, especially at such a young age, how that can affect their development, especially through adolescence, how their beliefs and everything come into question. It's really fascinating to me. And I think they both have a lot to do with the ideas of purpose and a reason for fighting, and especially identity. All of these things are just hugely impactful for the two of them. I'll leave the deep analysis for the video that will eventually come out that I continue to mention. But yes, no, I adore Law and Rinwell. I think that their chemistry is phenomenal. As for Kisara and Dohalim, they're much like their characters themselves. They're quite subtle in their relationship with each other. I suppose it's more of a mature vibe. I think it's partially because they know each other before the game, having once been in a situation where Dohalim had authority over Kisara, where she kind of idolized him for being the one to seemingly bring coexistence to Menancia. They were, in stark terms, master and slave, in a sense. So they end up knowing each other fairly well. Like, Kisara understands Dohalim in a way that the others don't, or at least she knows how to deal with him well, and Dohalim knows he could trust Kisara. But it's finding how they need to look at each other now that they aren't blinding themselves to reality. They need to relearn how they view each other, what their perspectives of each other are, and I think that's kind of the core theme of their relationship. And it's all very tied in with the idea of coexistence and Menancia and fighting for the good of the people and leadership and everything. It's quite interesting, but I do feel they tend to have a more subtle development. Maybe it's just because they don't get as much focus, maybe it's because they're not there for as long, I'm not sure. I do like what we get of them. I kind of wish we'd got to see a little bit more of the two of them together specifically, but I do enjoy what we got with them as well. So all in all, the relationships are all phenomenal and fantastic, and I will continue to talk about all of them to death. Like, seriously, I want to look into all of the inter-party relationships. That's how good they are. That's how much I enjoy this cast. But what else is something that I will never stop talking about with this game is the music, the soundtrack. My goodness. Last year the soundtrack finally came out and I was ecstatic. I immediately purchased it and I've never made such a great purchase. I listen to it literally all the time. I'm listening to it right now. I adore the soundtrack for this game. It's not exactly the most phenomenal soundtrack in the world. It's not going to make you go, wow, this is incredible. But like, the music it has works so well for the game that it is composed for. Genuinely, I think Motoi Sakuraba did such a great job in bringing this world to life through the music. Naturally, a key example of this is the area themes, specifically for each realm. I love the general field themes for each of the realms. Each of them have a motif which ties them together, the same motif that plays pretty much in each of the realms as far as I remember, at least in the field music. The town ones change depending on whether it's before or after liberation, except for Menancia specifically, because Menancia is the one place where it is already coexisting in a sense. Oh, and Niez doesn't either. Niez also doesn't change because the situation in Niez doesn't really get any better. I mean, Almadria and Dedham might be gone, but also most of the people in Niez are also gone, so it's kind of still a ghost town, so it continues to keep that same music that sounds eerie and like a ghost town. It's really good. I can't go into too much depth on it here or else I will be here for hours, but just the detail in the music, the instrumentation that's used, the way that they use specific instrumentation for each realm to make different realms sound in a certain way. Like they use a lot of the woodwinds like flutes and oboes in the Mahak-Zar music, whereas in the Ganath-Haros music there's a lot of strings. In Cyslodia there's a lot of brass that's used, and I think Calaglia has a lot of drums and percussion. Menacea has quite a lot of string as well, like violin specifically, because, you know, dohalim. Speaking of which, dissonance. Dohalim's boss theme. I freaking love it. The way that the violin sounds like it's kind of going out of control throughout the whole thing and it's being controlled by these other instruments. It's really good. I love dissonance. It's so good. It also connects with the other themes that are in Menacea because of like the violin, the strings, the percussion, the vocals. Oh gosh, I love it. I think each realm has its own particular instrumentation. Actually, it's really nicely contrasted then with Lenegus and Rena, specifically Lenegus, because Lenegus is so starkly different from anything we hear up until that point. But the fact that it's just strings, I think cellos and maybe double basses, just them playing quite frantically, and it's just these strings, it's very starkly different, but it creates this completely different atmosphere, showing the contrast between how things are up on Lenegus, which is, it's not even the same planet, and the situation's very frantic because everything's falling apart. Just, oh gosh, I love the Lenegus theme. The Rena theme is also really great with all of the piano and choral things. The choral stuff is very much used in conjunction with the ideas of like astral energy and power throughout the game. Certainly with like Alphen's theme, including that choral part, especially towards the end. The song for the Will of Dana that's used, that one has vocal in it. Yeah, pretty much everywhere where there is strong astral energy, there is some sort of vocal chorus element to the music. It's so well connected throughout. It's beautiful. And this, of course, also evident upon Rena, where there's like two voices that interconnect throughout the music. But the other thing about Rena, and also all of the kind of castle themes for the lords, is that they change. They have different arrangements, and that just is beautiful. Oh my goodness. Every single one has a battle arrangement that it blends seamlessly into as you go into battles in each of the palaces. For Balsif's one, it's like a 5/4 percussion heavy. It's really cool. It's really cool. I still am not sure if I'm completely understanding the tempo and percussion of it because it's just really interesting to listen to. I think it's 5/4, but it's got like a heavy percussion to it. It's lovely. And then that contrasted with the battle arrangement, with all the guitar riffs. My goodness. Oh, it's so good. Same for Night and Light in Cyslodia. That one's probably my favourite, to be honest. With it being more strings heavy, brass as well, in the ordinary arrangement with more guitar as well, in the battle arrangement. Actually, the Menacea one for the Autalina Palace, Peaceful Coexistence, I think it's called. Gosh, that one's really good, especially with how it takes, you know, what just sounds like a very regal, elegant, almost Baroque sort of piece. Not quite, but you know, sort of. And then like alters it so the rhythm feels different and the instrumentation, the violins and everything feels so different. Oh, it's really good. It's like the violin is trying to fight despite being drowned out by the fabrication of all the other instruments. Oh. And then there's the ship theme for Almadria. That one is in 7/8. 7/8. Kind of mimicking the rocking of a boat, the unsteady nature. It's also quite militaristic with the percussion and the sharp, abrupt rhythms that it uses in the instrumentation. Also the war horn that goes through it. Oh gosh, I love it so much. And then of course Gareth Harros with the Ice Moon? Ice Moon, is that what it's called? In Delpharis Castle. Gosh, I love it so much. I think it's also 5/4? I think it's 5/4, but I'm not 100% sure. They use a lot of irregular time signatures. It's very good. But having that be very much based on the strings, but also quite frantic and fast, kind of mimics how fast Volron is, to be honest, how he is very fleet of foot. I don't know, I think all of them are very good. I love that Rena's got 3. Endless Fabrication, I think it's called. It's phenomenal. I love the vocals in it, of course, as I mentioned before, the piano, and then how it's all translated into the battle one, and then how it changes again later as you get deeper into Rena. It's just such a great composition. Other notable mentions, Alphen's theme, phenomenal. We love it. I mentioned it before, Obstinate Loneliness, Law's battle theme. Literally, I love it so much. It ties into the Cyslodian music so well with the brass and the themes that are used within it, but also the fact that it's called Obstinate Loneliness just hurts my soul because it just reflects Law's mindset at the time. Oh god, I love that music so much. The other one I wanted to mention is, of course, the best theme on the soundtrack. Hidden Owls. Hidden Owls. The Owl Forest music. I'm sorry, that is the best music on the soundtrack. Genuinely, it brings such a smile to my face every time I hear it with the stupid slide whistle thing that plays. Oh, God. It's so goofy. Genuinely, it brings me such joy. Yeah, no, I love that piece of music. It's beautiful. Genuinely, I could go on about the soundtrack forever, but I will contain myself just for now because I've been talking for far too long about things, so I'll keep that for another video maybe. But man, I love the soundtrack. It's so very good. I think that's everything I wanted to talk about. So to conclude, God, I love Tales of Arise. Please play it if you haven't. Please, it's really good. I think the story is so worth experiencing. Even if it doesn't end up being like your favorite game in the world, even though it has flaws here and there, I still think it's a story that's worth experiencing. The story and the characters just really resonated with me on a personal level, and even though I'm sad about some of the wasted potential and the rushed development and things, I still think it's a great entry for new players to the series, especially with consideration to how the series may progress and evolve as it continues on. Genuinely, just I think this game is phenomenal because it pays homage to the previous games in the series while also beginning to head in the direction that the series may continue going towards. We just don't know. We've not seen what else the Tales series, or at least the Mothership titles, are going to be doing. We don't talk about the mobile games here. But yeah, no, I love Arise. It's such a great game, and I'm so glad I've played it and that I played it here on the channel. I think that was just a really fun experience, and I'm so looking forward to diving even deeper into the game and analysing it even more because there's just so much to look at, and I'm so in love with this game. But yeah, I think that's everything. My goodness, hi. I'm sorry this lasted so long. I didn't expect to be here for 3 hours. This is an hour longer than the first version of this that I recorded. If you've listened all this way, thank you so much. I'm glad. Thank you for the support. Let me know down below, what did you think of Tales of Arise? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Let me know. I'd love to hear all thoughts, theories, opinions, etc. Talking about this game makes me so happy. I did an update video fairly recently, so if you're wanting to know what else may be on the cards in the future, feel free to go and look at that update video. It should hopefully have some more context for what's happening on the channel in the future. I haven't recorded it yet, so we'll see. And look forward to those analyses that I keep talking about that will eventually get done. But yeah, thank you for all of the support and thank you for watching through. I hope you took breaks. Did you stretch? Have you drank anything? Have you eaten? It's been 3 hours. Are you okay? Oh man, but yeah, thank you once again for watching and listening. I hope you enjoyed this little chat. I hope you have a great day, night, or whatever the time it is for you. And I'll see you next time.